listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, ever vigilant, burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Good morning, everybody. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern. It is December 10th, and we've got headlines for you. Let's get into them. First up in COVID stats. Yesterday in the United States, there were 123,484 new COVID cases reported, also 1,294 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 119,788 cases per day. That's an increase of 30% from the average 2 weeks ago. 60% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 71% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 49,628,788 people across the United States. It has killed 793,227 people here. In national news, well, it's kind of international news, but I'm just going to it first. Julian Assange can again be extradited to the United States following a decision today within just the last hour or so by the London High Court. That decision overturned an earlier ruling by Judge Vanessa Barretzer. She had ruled that Assange would likely find special administrative measures, quote unquote, that are used in American prisons to be oppressive due to the state of his mental health. This new ruling is based on 4 assurances the United States sent in a diplomatic note dated February 5th, 2021. In that note, the U.S. assures that Assange would not be subjected to quote-unquote special administrative measures. Might want to come back to that to explain that. That he wouldn't be held at a maximum security prison before or after trial. That the U.S. would consent to an application by Assange to serve his time in Australia if convicted in the USA. And that Assange would be given, quote, appropriate clinical and psychological treatment, end quote, while in custody in the United States. Assange's lawyers, by the way, have contested those claims, saying that those guarantees are ambiguous, vague, caveated, that kind of thing. Anyway, the judges in this case ordered that it be sent to Westminster Magistrates Court with a direction that the district judge there refer it to the UK Home Secretary, who would make the final decision. Priti Patel, I think her name is.
Yeah.
And we'll be coming back to this at 8:30. Big news, of course. We're going to be talking with Misty Winston later on in the show. Bad news, obviously, for Assange and anybody who's more or less on his side. And plenty of people protesting out in front of the court as they were ruling there this morning. I saw footage of it online. Mm-hmm. But we'll come back to it, of course. Big news for the day. But we got more headlines. U.S. President Joe Biden gathered over 100 world leaders at a summit on Thursday and made a plea to bolster democracies around the world, calling safeguarding rights and freedoms in the face of rising authoritarianism the quote-unquote defining challenge of the current era. Oh, yeah, that rising authoritarianism that we were doing with Assange. In the opening speech for his virtual Summit for Democracy, quote-unquote, a first-of-its-kind gathering intended to counter democratic backsliding worldwide, Biden said the global freedoms were under threat from autocrats seeking to expand power, export influence, and justify repression. Oh, your power, the power that you're getting into with this whole thing with Russia right now, the influence that you're exporting with your son doing the laundering campaigns for you overseas with other countries, or the repression. I mean, I just mentioned Assange, but you could go to the Black Lives Matter protests last year. And people might say, oh, Trump is responsible for those or policing or those problems. But the Ferguson origins of the BLM protests were under Barack Obama, for whom Biden was vice president. I don't know, man. I'm kind of going all over the place there, admittedly. I guess my point is that it's hypocritical, but of course a lot of people are saying that about the Summit for Democracy.
Yeah, I mean, the United States is not necessarily in a position to basically determine what's a democracy and what's not. I mean, if you think about our policies over the past, decades, give or take 100 years or so, the number of coups we engineered, again, coups against democracies because we didn't necessarily like the tenor of that democracy. Democracies are messy. And if I need to deal with just one straight man or one strong man, well, that strong man can allow me access to materials. It can allow me access to all sorts of foreign policy quirks. Well, you don't necessarily have to have this fight with either some kind of Congress or Parliament or some kind of democratic order. I mean, even in Honduras, Zelaya, they got rid of him in a coup. This was when Hillary Clinton was in office. And the guy who ends up taking the job is under indictment for coke, basically trying to export coke. It turned into basically a narco state. And it's just one state. If you look at Brazil and the kind of coup that took place there with Lula, you look around the world, we don't really have
destroy democracies.
Yeah, we destroy
Our job is to destroy democracies and replace them with autocracies.
Yeah, so it's a bit rich.
That's been our MO for decades.
Yeah, to have a democracy summit as if we're the protectors and guarantors and the determining factor of what's a democracy. It's nonsense. And you made another good point about the media angle for that. One of the things that they were talking about doing was to preserve independent media in various countries. Julian Assange has been sitting in a jail cell for God knows how long. And his only crime is being the person who exposes what goes on behind the scenes in regards to government policy and that type of thing. It's things that all, more likely than not, they try to hide. And so it's like, there's this hypocrisy all over the place. You're talking about a democracy summit when you often destroy democracies. You're talking about a free, open media when the guy who represents that is basically sitting in a prison and apparently just lost his appeal in regards to not being extradited. Yeah, it's a farce, to put it mildly.
It's terrible.
Not to mention, Joe Biden has had a press conference in over a month. He's gone as far as to have it like 150 days at one point, like 140 something days. Meaning, if the job is to have this kind of free, independent press, but the president is nowhere to be found, however, working behind the scenes in order to get better coverage, none of that stuff, is indicative of a free and fair media.
It all looks very bad.
Yes.
Anybody who's looking at, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people feel that way when they think about the U.S. hosting a summit for democracy. It smells to high heaven.
Yeah.
Jussie Smollett was convicted Thursday of staging a hate crime. That's nearly 3 years after he claimed two Trump-loving bigots beat him up, tied a noose around his neck, and doused him in bleach in a misbegotten bid to raise his public profile. Well, that wasn't what they were trying. That's what he was trying, and it was misbegotten. Well, I guess, he did raise his public profile a bit. To give him some
not
credit.
In the way that I think he wants.
Maybe not how he wanted, but the plan did work.
Honestly, we can come back to that. He may get jail time over this. Because if you think about it, if Smollett would have came out and said, okay, my story is ludicrous. You got me. Fair enough. I did it. I lied. I paid the brothers. I wanted to do so and so. His career would have been over. Fair enough. However, he would have basically gotten a slap on the wrist, maybe community service or something to that point. However, if you're going to go on stand and you're going to lie flagrantly on stand, which is basically what the jury is saying, right? If he's convicted of 5 counts, 5 out of 6.
And he was just lying.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
he's just lying.
He was saying.
And he's sitting on the stand lying. And judges can be pretty punitive for that particular case. Meaning, if you would have just let that go, he might have gotten a slap on the wrist. Now, it's possible he would get jail time for basically lying on the stand, perjuring himself.
It's possible. And technically, each one of those charges does carry a potential sentence, but I doubt that they're going to try to make
go that far,
much.
Yeah,
go that far. Like 3 years per charge. So he's not, but they're not going to put him away for 15 years.
No, I don't think that.
And clearly, that's not exactly how the sentencing would work. I know it's more complicated than just, you add them all up. But still, the point is, no, I don't see that happening. It would be interesting if he gets some. I don't know, man. This whole thing is sad. But again, what comes back to my mind is the conversation we were having yesterday with Ted Rawl, where he was making the point that Jussie Smollett, even though this was I believe it was Ted Rawl, even though this was a stupid mistake, it was like, look at all these other people who aren't going to face any of these consequences. He brought up Hillary Clinton, which might seem, okay, why are you bringing up Hillary Clinton? But like, look at all the people who came out to support Jussie Smollett and the level of lies that Jussie was telling. And about what? Jussie was basically trying to self-aggrandize by blaming a boogeyman that he created out of thin air, effectively. Well, that's what Hillary Clinton did.
Yeah.
Of course. And then Jussie also had the protection of
big political actors. Which makes me more inclined for him to be prosecuted. If not less, in that case.
Totally. But then the thing is are we just taking something out on him when really we're pissed at these other people and they get off scot-free? The real powerful ones like Michelle Obama or Don Lemon. I don't know if, Don Lemon's getting some flack for his handling of this, of course. But
should that mean that we prosecute nobody?
No.
That's the rub. I mean, like, I agree with you that...
no, I'm not...
Sometimes it's like, dude, all of these murders are taking place in Chicago and you're prosecuting this guy for basically lying. And that's a fair point.
It means we should prosecute everybody, including us.
Well, yeah, agreed. I totally agree. I guess my thing is, by the same token, I don't necessarily like this notion of using homophobia and racism as a ploy and manipulate certain people who are reactive about that stuff in order to make yourself more profit. and then at the point where you're caught, put out this ridiculous lie challenging the intelligence of pretty much each and every person, to then go so far as to get political actors or political contacts to try to get you off the hook on that issue. Most other people would not have that political access to be getting off the hook. Somebody from Michelle Obama's office is not going to call each and every person to get them off the hook in the way that he has this level of clout. So it's like, not only do you have clout, not only did you have all sorts of finances and money, it just wasn't enough for you.
But everybody believed him on that, and everybody. Why did people support him?
There was a lot of people who didn't buy it.
Well, okay, sorry, no, and I say that I'm doing hyperbole. I'm straight up doing way too much hyperbole there. Crazy levels of hyperbole. The most hyperbole ever.
But the woke crowd did, definitely.
No, of course. But I'm saying the big political players who came out to support him clearly went all in for it.
Yeah.
And if you look at, okay, you're making the point that he hurt the movements in some sense, like that he diluted.
I think he did.
By crying wolf.
Yeah.
But they did that all the more too, and they fell for it. I don't know, there's this sense of complicity where they're mutually parasitizing the American public and our culture.
They are. Agreed.
Together, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. He sets the pretext for it. And
then they go along with it and they believe it. And even if they don't have good reason to believe it, they're like, well, this makes for a very interesting case for us to talk about. You know what I mean? Black gay man beat up by Trump,
supporters,
Trump bigots.
I don't think anybody wants to, well, that's not true. But
they didn't, I guess my point is they didn't just support him out of empathy or sympathy. They supported him because he was a useful tool and weapon for them.
Oh, see, I think it's a little bit of both.
Maybe both. But I'm saying, I say both.
Yeah.
I say both. I guess I should say both. I said not A, it's B.
Yeah.
Probably a bit of A, but also I really want to emphasize the B part.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm pissed at them.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, if you're looking at Democratic Party politics in general, I mean, part of their strategy basically is to use issues of identity as this kind of wedge issues. And yeah, Republicans do this too, but Democrats have used identity in lieu of like economic relief. And, and the reason is obvious. It's like, yes, they're using this entirely as a political ploy. By the same token, it's effective because identity is one of those things that people cling to. And if you're, an aggrieved minority within the context of the country, be it on sex, be it on race, or whatever particular thing, religious, demographic, or anything else, you're going to take that stuff very seriously if you feel that somebody's coming after you for those particular identity issues. That stuff is, to the bone. So it does create this kind of, I don't want to call it hysteria, but this kind of righteous understanding of, okay, I'm going to be in opposition to the people who are in opposition of me. By the same token, they're doing that for the exact reason that they don't want to challenge their donors. They don't want to challenge people who are putting money in their pockets, or that will give them certain advantages of company positions after they get out of their time in office. It's far easier to say, okay, let's use these issues of identity in lieu of this other stuff.
Totally.
But what does that do in regards to how a society functions? It's going to make them far more reactive. It's going to allow stuff like this to go almost automatic without necessarily the pushback or even the questions that may arise from it. And I got to be honest, I don't think anybody wants to immediately come to the conclusion this guy's lying when there's a sexual assault or something. However, at the point where you see stuff like this, you can totally see how people would look at sexual harassment claims, not sexual harassment claims, but claims of homophobia and racism and be like, yeah, that Smollett guy,
exactly. Then they use it to dismiss him.
Yeah, it becomes much more dismissive.
It doubles down on it.
Yeah. But I guess my point is, it's that context that's set in this kind of wokeness where race and everything else is kind of divided and split up.
Well, and we've been focusing on the sort of homophobia part, but if we can talk about the black being black part for a second, like a large part of the whole BLM thing is like allegations that, okay, the police are too violent, or that, various victims of theirs, often black people, black men, I guess we could, sort of stereotype it as black people in general.
Yeah.
The victims there are going to be making this stuff up or overinflating it. That's part of the argument going on, right?
Yeah.
Is that, okay, either it's the police are like overly violent, or you just have people who are like overstating their case because the police, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
People who are, my point is, you've been focusing on the homophobia aspects of it, but if you look at like BLM and the idea that he completely made this up out of thin air and fitted into preconceived cultural
Trump is a white nationalist and
warfare tropes of who's fighting whom. Exactly. It's like it's weakening the case for that. And that was a super salient, I don't know, I guess maybe 2020 was really when we saw BLM come back up. So this happened before that. But I felt like, especially if it had been timed during that, it would have been, I don't know, especially egregious.
We're still within the context.
Regardless, it was still in the context of it. There was still stuff going on.
Absolutely. Democratic politics feeds into that stuff, man. And so it's like when you get this kind of event that takes place, all of them are automatically on board for like, oh, this is how horrendous this is. And some of that stuff is incentivized because they hate Trump, of course. But at the point where people are primed to that mindset of being attacked, that's where it goes.
That's what they do. I'm going to close this out. We have more headlines. We'll get to those in later hours. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are actually closing this segment out. We'll be back in a minute with Jamarl's soapbox, his monologue segment, and probably a short back and forth between us on the topic that he chooses for his monologue. And after that, we get into a conversation with a guest at 7:30. But for now, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the record.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys just so happen to live in the D.C. area or find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I got to be honest, I didn't see Julian Assange extradition request by the United States, or let's say the appeal, going through. I was en route to the office, and oftentimes when I'm en route to the office, I'm still accumulating stories and accumulating my ideas around the monologue and everything else. And so by the time I get here, I'm somewhat shocked when I hear that headline that Assange has basically, they've approved. Well, it's going to go to Priti Patel and whether or not he's extradited. This is somewhat rich. And this wasn't necessarily the planned monologue. I wanted to kind of have this conversation about Mark Meadows and the information that he basically gave. It was a 38-page presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, that got into how Trump was basically planning to steal the election. Now, I've been pretty clear from the beginning that Donald Trump tried a putsch attempt against the United States. And people can bring in and say, well, yeah, they tried a soft coup against him also. That's fair enough. But it doesn't necessarily change the point. For whatever Trump's reasons, be it entirely ego, be it he was bitter about the previous effort to try to take him out that office with the Russiagate stuff, he still tried to do it. He loses an election. After losing an election, he screams to high heaven that he was robbed, he was cheated, that Hugo Chavez was dragged from the grave in order to help with a voting machine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this stuff was basically ridiculous. Yes, he had his day in court. He had several days in court. And at no point could he substantiate those claims. Nevertheless, Donald Trump still pushed with a plan to overturn the election. You could see it when he was basically doing what he was doing in that office, trying to get the governor in, I believe it was Arizona, but also definitely in Georgia, to find him some votes to overturn the Georgia win by Joe Biden in that particular situation, or pushing certain Congress members to back him in repudiating the election. For that matter, even trying to get Mike Pence, who apparently thought about it, significantly so, Dan Quayle changing his mind on it, but using Mike Pence's ceremonial role to basically pass the baton to the next president as a way of stalling, inhibiting, and creating all sorts of chaos with the overarching hope that Donald Trump will be the one to be able to take power. Mark Meadows is going to be found in contempt of court. Meadows was supposed to have a conversation yesterday, basically submit to testimony. Mark Meadows didn't submit to testimony, basically leaning on this notion of presidential privilege, that is apparently being sussed out in courts or will be sussed out in courts. But Congress blew that away to select committee and basically said they're going to hold him in contempt. What's interesting about this, Mark Meadows, fourth Trump chief of staff. What's interesting about this is he did cooperate for a while. And within that cooperation, he submitted all sorts of fascinating information. But the one thing that he submitted, this broke, I think it was yesterday, the 38-page presentation entitled Election Fraud, Foreign Interference, and Options for 6th of January. This basically took place one day before the Capitol riot. But the planning, text messages and everything else go all the way back to immediately after the election, where they started putting out plans of using alternate electors, basically people who would say that Trump won as opposed to Biden won. Oftentimes when you go and you make your vote, you're not voting directly for the president. You have a popular vote, you have electoral vote, but what you're voting for is basically the elector who would go out and vote for the president. States have certain, let's say, restrictions per se, in order to control these guys, meaning whoever you vote for, that's what it turns out. But there's all sorts of mechanisms in that process that create all sorts of chaos for people who don't necessarily want to hand it over or who don't necessarily believe in American democracy and wants to kind of undermine this notion of American governance where power is transferred to the person who won the election. They were going to utilize all of this stuff, including calling for a national security a shutdown in sorts. They're using marshals to go get the voting machines. I mean, it runs the gambit. January 6th, however, where this information is coming up at it, doesn't entirely seem to apply to this. Meaning, the people who basically raided the Capitol is one thing. The putsch attempt that Donald Trump was trying to pull off, that's evident by what Mark Meadows is basically releasing, this PowerPoint slide and the text messages and everything else, is something else. Those are two different things, even though those things were, in some respects, working in coordination with one another from the standpoint of stop the steal. They're different. Meaning, even though the information that Mark Meadows released is fascinating and is being released within the context of the January 6th thing, it doesn't entirely apply to January 6th. I hope that difference is being made and understood. My point in this is getting across how extensive their plans were to undermine this election. They were stark, they were astonishing, and yeah, they went far. Meadows was knee-deep in all of this process. So Meadows, not going to testify fair enough, but Meadows has already given up a ton of information to get across what was going on in Trump's head in that White House at the time, after the election, leading up to January 6th. They also, in addition to the kind of Pence thing, the U.S. Marshals and the troops is somewhat of a chilling thing. This idea that these guys were going to go to the various states in order to grab the machines and everything else. What would that look like? It would look like a president basically not accepting the fact they'd lost and employing the military, or for that matter, the National Guard, to assist him in his putsch attempt. Some of this stuff is just rough, man. I mean, just the extent and the lengths he was willing to go to try to retain power and to keep himself in power. And honestly, we dodged a bullet, to put it mildly. I mean, some of these November 7th documents, they have an email discussing the appointment of alternate selectors or electors. This is the thing I mentioned before, as part of a direct and collateral attack after the election. January 5th email talking about a PowerPoint, election fraud, foreign interference, and options. And the election interference boiled down to them making the excuse that, hey, they were foreign actors. This is familiar from somewhere. Foreign actors interfering with this election requires us to take these actions in order to ensure the integrity of America's election. All of that stuff was done to do the opposite, to undermine it and keep Trump in office. But again, there's a difference between people who show up to protest this notion of stop the steal and everything else at the Capitol, and those people decide to raid the Capitol, versus the putsch attempt that Donald Trump was trying to push through in a political sense and in a political way. Those things, to me anyway, are somewhat different. I want to jump to the Assange thing just for a bit. I think it's ironic that they are having the economic summit. The democracy summit. And in that democracy summit, Biden is talking about spending, nearly $500 million on independent media around the world and to assist in media production and whatnot. And the reality of it is we're using laws in the United States to go after people outside of the United States who are doing media, but not extending those protections to those people. And with a straight face would say, we are for democracies. We are for a free press and information given to the free press. That's what we're for. That's what we believe in. However, yes, we will hypocritically extradite Assange to the United States for being that element of that free press. It's just astonishing to me that they're willing to do this. And then they're going to call it a democracy summit as if we are somehow the standard for democracies, despite the fact that we've gone around the world undermining those democracies, putting in strongmen at some points, killing certain leaders at some points in order to get people in who are going to be more in line with us, even the Ukraine stuff. I mean, and the way that guy was talking about yesterday, we are going to support Ukraine because we believe in democracy. Whereas Ukraine was the diminishment and undermining of an elected government. And I would make the point that that is more normal as opposed to this notion of us supporting those democracies. Shane, I had two stories. The Assange thing bothers me. And it was just because I just came across the Assange thing this morning, realizing, oh my God, they're going to extradite him. The other thing with Mark Meadows is just disturbing. I mean, we knew that Donald Trump was basically trying to, this kind of staying in office and staying in power and everything else. And I get that some people can make the argument, well, they basically did that to him. I mean, they tried to take him out in a soft coup. Agreed. Totally agree. By the same token, it doesn't say anything for what he was trying to do himself based on the documents that were provided. But hit on any of that.
I'll go to the first one that you hit or the second one that you just brought up, which is the Trump document, the PowerPoint thing. I can't figure out where that's from. That's not like a document that Trump created. That's one that Mark Meadows submitted. Yeah. But I literally can't find the author of the document. And if you read through some of the high level, like the quotes from the PowerPoint, it sounds bad and it sounds scary. I hadn't heard about this until you brought it up. But literally looking into it. It just came out.
It was something Mark Meadows just gave to them.
Totally, yeah. No, just last night. I hadn't seen it until you brought it up. So I've been looking into it over the last couple of minutes, and I haven't been able to, and until maybe it's just me, but I haven't been able to figure out the sourcing on it, which makes me, Mark Meadows, I saw somewhere that he said he liked it, basically. He liked what he was seeing in some of these things, but I don't know if it was
when they asked him about the electors, he was like, I like it, or something like that.
Yeah, something about that. But the PowerPoint that you're referring to has a lot more inflammatory language, but also it's not like either Trump wrote it or anybody. I don't know who wrote it. I don't even know that Trump saw it or approved it or anything like that. It seems like literally this was a spicy thing that the committee found when they subpoenaed Meadows and found a lot of stuff.
Meadows gave it up.
Meadows gave it up.
Because, for a while he was working with the select committee. And if you think about it, it is what Trump was doing. I mean, they were trying to get electors, or talking about alternate electors. They were trying to get the guy in.
But this is Georgia. A little bit. I could go through some of the language on this one, and I also wanted to hit us on, so I don't know how long.
Oh, go for it.
But just some of the language on this is pretty extreme. Where again, they're talking about like not just in general contesting the results of the election and investigating it, that kind of thing, but like directly overturning it, replacing the electors, Democrat electors with Republican ones in states they suspect. Where if you know that there's election fraud, okay, yeah, sure, go for it. But it hasn't been proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
But that was their argument, though.
So their thing was, sort of without convincing the American public fully to just go ahead and overturn the results of the election, which sounds a lot like a coup without resorting to the military.
Yes.
But my point is, that's what I see in the PowerPoint, which I don't know who the hell wrote it. And I don't know, again, it's like you can, that's not Trump. That might be somebody outside the Trump campaign trying to appeal to Trump, trying to get them, okay, let's do it this way. And then they go to an nth degree or whatever. But my point is, I don't side with Trump on how he views that election. I don't think it was thrown in that way. If there is a way I think it was thrown, it's just through the media's coverage of it and through suppressing the Hunter Biden story and not letting that get out at crucial times when that probably would have changed the results of the election. But Trump's case is bunk. But my point is, on this specific one, I don't think he wrote the PowerPoint. I literally can't figure out who did write it, but I have no reason to believe that he or anyone closer to Trump than to Meadows wrote it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, but I don't know why you think that. I mean,
because they would say it.
Who would say it?
If
it just got it, the document.
I understand.
And I would say that
if they knew and it was somebody close to Trump, they would say that, because
Mark Meadows was chief of staff of the Trump administration.
And why aren't we figuring out who wrote it?
They just got the document.
I know, but he would know, and they would know. That's what I'm saying.
No, what I mean is Mark Meadows at this point
to Trump,
is not talking, and he's basically going to be held in contempt. They could have asked him that question if he would have showed up yesterday for it.
This is sort of another thing, but it's
real quick. One more point. It is self-evident what Trump was doing. Meaning whether or not the president sat down and wrote on toilet paper his plan after the election in order to, take it.
But then
or,
why
or
is
to
this
keep
new
it going.
document interesting in any way? It seems interesting because it's exceptional, because it's going a lot further than what Trump had said previously.
But that's just it. It doesn't. It's right in line with what Trump was doing. The independent elector stuff, he was doing it. Did he believe that the election was stolen? Well, he kept saying it for several months, so I have to
I didn't see him
take his
talking
credit.
about directly replacing like Democrat with Republican electors.
Oh, that stuff was there, man. That stuff was floating all around in these conversations that was taking place.
Floating around is
Even
different
trying to get the election overturned in Georgia, or for that matter, Arizona, or trying to get the courts to overturn that stuff.
I've said my piece on this one.
Yeah.
I want to turn to the Assange thing.
Go for it.
Especially because we're going to have to turn away from it pretty soon, just because we're bringing our guest on. We're going to be talking about something pretty much completely different. Oh, we could hit it, but we're talking with Carl Jha in just a minute.
Yeah, it'd be weird with Jha.
I'm really looking. All I'll say about it is this, because we're going to be talking about it over the next couple of hours. I'm planning on hitting it pretty hard, and we're going to be talking with Misty Winston at 8:30. When we speak with Misty Winston at 8:45, we're also going to be taking calls.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking with her for a full half hour. I plan to, at least about this. If anybody wants to join that conversation, you can please feel free to get into it then. Even though we're talking with her, if you have questions, if there's stuff you want clarified, because I know a lot of people care about this, if you want to get into that conversation, 8:45 is the best time to do so, and that'll be with Misty Winston again. And with that, I want to take us into a brief break. We'll be coming back with Carl Jha in a minute, talking about a bunch of stuff relating to China. We can be talking about, of course, various countries moving towards and away from Taiwan. Nicaragua just formally changed its diplomatic recognition status of Taiwan and is now, choosing to deal with Beijing instead. That leaves less than 15 countries recognizing Taiwan. We could hit that angle. We will also be talking about Biden's attempts to win Russia away from China, whatever that means, whether that would even work, what that whole thing looks like, with Carl Jha when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in just a minute.
Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And as Shane was mentioning, there's all sorts of things taking place right now in regards to China. One of those things has to do with the Beijing Olympics, where all of these people, this kind of diplomatic boycott of the Olympics. There's the Evergrande default. There's also the Democracy Summit, where Biden didn't allow China and Russia to show up and participate, something that is not necessarily going down well. Shane also mentioned the Nicaragua issue, where Nicaragua has basically refused to accept Taiwan, in a sense, seeming a nod to China. And so there are all sorts of items that are up. We're waiting on our guest, Carl Jha, to come on to discuss this with us.
Well, and the deal was, and if we may have to pivot.
Yeah.
But the deal was with Nicaragua, they had been one of only like 15 countries to formally recognize Taiwan, because most countries recognize China and choose to deal with China, and then have, I forget what the name of it is, but some sort of like smaller kind of embassy to deal with Taiwan, where it's, it's not an official
I forget
recognition.
the name of it. Yeah, but
exactly, you know what I mean.
It's a non-embassy,
a little embassy post kind of thing to maintain communications. Anyway, Nicaragua had been one of 15 countries. They have just now reversed that, leaving only now 14 countries. And when I say countries, they're like small nation states that you don't think of very often. And then ones like the Holy See, the Vatican, is one of the 14 quote-unquote countries. Anyway, I'm not trying to denigrate any of the 14 countries that I just mentioned, but they just changed that. And of course, not on that list is the United States, interestingly enough, even though we're leading the global charge to have Taiwan, whatever global charge we are pushing in opposition to China, seeking in whatever way we are independence for Taiwan, which clearly we are. We're trying to straddle this weird ambiguous middle ground.
At the Democracy Summit.
We're not on that list. Yeah, they're not even there. But we're not on that list. It's weird how we do these things. Does that make sense?
I mean, but keep in mind, a lot of that might have to do with the pressure that we used to put on Nicaragua, like the kill squads that we put in there to push back on Sandinistas, if I'm not mistaken. Not to mention this kind of recent thing where we were pressing on Nicaragua politically. So it's very possible that the people who basically won entirely understands the U.S. placement on that stuff and may be more in line with China. I mean, Evo Morales, before he was deposed, had a deal worked out with China for the lithium reserves in Bolivia. At the point where he's deposed and a new, fascist government comes in, this notion of the deal kind of goes out the window with China. Meaning it's very possible that this can be a reverse of that. Whereas Nicaragua, whereas Honduras, once it goes fascist, it basically says, okay, we're not going to do this deal with China. We're close to the United States. This might have been the reverse. That's the thought anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can we pivot? We're still trying to get our guest on, but I want to pivot to Assange for a second because we a lot to talk about there.
Yeah.
One thing that's sad here is, yes, as Assange's lawyers said, I don't know how the heck they're going to be able to hold the United States, any of the guarantees, these 4 assurances that the U.S. gave to Britain over how they're going to treat Assange.
They have no power over that.
They have no.
That stuff is that. The judge doesn't even have power over that.
Britain doesn't have a judge doesn't have power over that. Britain doesn't have power over that.
Yeah.
In some of these cases, I don't even think the U.S. has power over it. In the sense that like they hand Assange over to the prison system, and the prison system gets to choose
the choice exactly
where to put him.
Because the judge could say, "We're going to put this guy in a minimum security prison." There's no way that the judge has power over that. That the prison system can put him in a just like what Daniel Hale, if I'm not mistaken, where he was supposed to go into this low security and everything else, and they just dumped him in this kind of high security prison, treating him like a terrorist.
Yep.
Meaning it's the prisons or the jails. It's somewhat of a misnomer. We had Kyriakou talking about this.
Totally.
Where it's a misnomer that people have this belief that the judge is the one who makes the decisions. The Bureau of Prisons. So in the sense of the judge basically saying, okay, the U.S. is making all of these assurances that the U.S. in no way can stand by. And Britain is like, okay, well, they gave us assurances. We should trust them.
It's true. And then I turn, I'll turn to another one of the assurances, which is the U.S. said that it would consent to a request from Assange that he be moved to Australia, basically, if convicted.
Right.
That he be, I'm forgetting what the word is, but that he be held in Australia, imprisoned in Australia. But and then a couple of things come to mind there. For one thing, Australia, it seems like it's about as like it's the country that seems like it's most firmly in the pocket of the United States or something like that.
I mean, look at the Beijing Olympics thing.
Yeah, the Beijing Olympics, or the cutting off of trade, or
AUKUS,
it was
the other
like
one.
mocked in Australian TV shows about how like they're going to rabble-rouse against China as their number one enemy, while China is simultaneously their number one trading partner, and how it makes no sense. It was made fun of, and why are they doing that? To stay on the U.S. side, of course. Well, the assumption is that they do the exact same thing if they had Assange on their soil. Of course, Assange, an Australian citizen. That's crucially why he'd be going back to Australia. But then there are also these questions that come to mind, like, can we, I don't know, on none of these angles is the United States going to be able to hold its end of the stick up.
Yeah.
Say we extradite him to Assange. Say we extradite Assange to Australia. Can we guarantee that they're going to treat him well? Probably not, right? That's not at all included in this agreement. So it feels like there are loopholes upon loopholes upon loopholes if people want to take their wrath out on Assange and make him yet a more convincing model for how not to behave. In other words, look all the pain we can inflict on this person, so don't follow in his path. Don't do his kind of journalism. It just seems like if people want to hurt Assange once he gets brought over here, they can do all the more. And of course, they've been able to hurt him pretty well from overseas.
Yeah.
So
kind of public torture that they've been able to do. Yeah.
And that's what this whole thing hinged upon. Vanessa Baratzer's earlier decision earlier this year had been that basically there are these special administrative measures that U.S. Prisons can do if a prisoner has some relationship with somebody outside, has some tether outside, and somebody can either be hurt, harmed, danger can be caused, damage can be brought to the world in some way by that prisoner communicating with the outside world. Basically, if they have confidential information, or if they're an active threat in some way, like they're in touch with a terrorist cell, for instance, those kinds of things, there are special administrative measures to prevent outside contact with the world.
Right.
Makes sense, right? If and theoretically, if Assange has access to confidential information, keys or whatever that he could leak, the idea is he gets brought over to the United States and they keep him from having all contact or a lot of contact with the outside world. They bring, they do the real heavy
did that now.
Prison stuff to him.
Yeah.
And he's in Belmarsh max security prison by British standards, but I don't want to know how that compares to American standards. Probably America's significantly worse.
Yeah.
Point is, that's why Vanessa Baratzer said Assange, who is smart enough to probably kill himself, even if they put him into a ward where they're preventing him from killing himself, and has been through enough and has enough weirdness probably just going on, maybe he would kill himself.
Yeah.
And then the American prisons are probably going to put him in one of these cases, in one of these situations. Her reasoning, which didn't make sense to me until I started to read through it more, was basically like, and the autistic stuff is still a little bit weird when she says, okay, he's more likely to kill himself because he's autistic.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a bit bigoted, frankly. But regardless, I get why she does that. Now, why is this most recent case happening? I want to wait. We should talk to Misty because maybe I'm getting something slightly wrong here, just my reading of it this morning. But it seems to me, based on their ruling, it's completely based on the diplomatic note that was sent in February by the United States, giving these 4 assurances. And I read them out in the headlines, but basically sets of assurances that Assange wouldn't be subjected to these special administrative measures, that he wouldn't be closed off and kept from the world, that he wouldn't be put into a maximum security prison, either before or after he's convicted, either while he's awaiting trial or if he's convicted, after he's convicted, that they would assent to his request to be sent to Australia. The United States, there was another one. I
don't believe any of that.
They gave out all these guarantees, but I don't believe any of it either. Yeah. And it seems to me foolish for the British judges to believe it too. And so if you look at, should they believe that diplomatic note simply? If your answer is yes, well, then I guess they made the right decision. If your answer is no, then I guess they made the wrong one. But I
got to be honest. I don't see what they're using to even, meaning
who's going to hold them to it?
Who's going to hold?
Who watches the watchman? Who's actually going to enforce it?
And honestly, what do they even use as evidence that they would stand up to that stuff? I mean, they just released information saying the United States was thinking about murdering Assange in this kind of rendition out of an embassy. Now that. All sorts of international issues associated with it. Just came out. Yeah.
In between, we have all the more reason to doubt what the United States said in February.
Exactly. And again, like we were making the point before, they can't make this assurance that, okay, we're not going to put them in these administrative functions, or we're not going to put them in a supermax. How can you make that assurance if you're not even the one that controls that particular process? I mean, so it's like, I get the feeling that the British court was this kind of rubber stamp. And it's like, yeah, they had the trial, yeah, they had the hearing and everything else, but she sincerely didn't necessarily care about the reality of the assurances. It's almost like the assurance in and of itself was enough for them to just kind of say, okay, fair enough, you gave us these assurances. Will they stand by them? Probably not. But what they're going to say is, well, they gave us these assurances. We had no way to know that they weren't going to stand by these assurances as they put them in prison at that point. I would go so far as to say they didn't care. At the end of the day, that ruling is weird. He's autistic, so he's going to off himself at some point. And at the time, we kept saying, that's so weird. Why is she using that? And is there something that's going on behind the scenes in the legalese of that particular statement that is going to unravel at some point later? Or is there some kind of legalese there that we are just unaware of that it can be challenged in a particular way to undermine the argument?
And it was.
Yeah.
That is actually what happened. It wasn't about it being, the autistic part. It was just the special, because her decision was based on the special administrative measures that the U.S. could put into place. And a key thing here was that in the diplomatic note, they made, and I already said this, but in that diplomatic note, they said, we will not do those.
Exactly.
We won't do those to Assange. We're not going to do those to Assange.
And vassal state Britain, that was enough.
And for them, that was enough to be like, okay, since you're not going to do those, then this no longer applies. Therefore, extradition will go through.
They needed zero evidence. That's what I mean. It's like they need it's a court, but in this case, zero evidence. I mean, so for the life of me, you would think that they would know better, which is why I come back to the conclusion that this seemed to just be somewhat of a rubber stamp to extradite him because we're friends with Britain.
Well, no, we're not friends with Britain.
US.
We're not friends with Britain.
We're not friends with Britain.
We're not friends with Britain. No, they're afraid of us, right? They don't have to trust us because we can threaten them and overrule them at any point.
Yeah.
Right?
This kind of vassal state. Yeah. I mean, it's pathetic, man.
And they're afraid of us for now. They're afraid of us for now.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry. Go for it, Jamarl.
No, you're fine. I mean, it is this situation where all of these states or these kind of smaller countries hobble around the United States for warmth and protection against, this kind of external world. So, yeah, I agree with you on that.
Well, but we bring them in, too. It's like we destroy, I don't know, we threaten them if they don't choose to get closer to us, right? And it's like, okay, we'll choose whose side are you on? And I don't know. I'm still trying to create my poetic image of the United States as it relates to other countries. But, we feel like a bully. But that's already been said and done so many times. But with Assange, yeah, this is where the rubber kind of meets the road on this one. Is Britain just going to acquiesce to the United States requests / demands?
Seems that answer is yes.
Yes.
That's unfortunate, man. I mean, it's disturbing, to put it mildly. And then, I always have this question too about if they're so willing to go after Assange like this because he's basically putting out news, information, truthful news and information about what the world, how it actually works. Then what about the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN? And why doesn't CNN, Washington Post, New York Times experiences that level of pressure and the way that Assange experiences that level of pressure in the news that he puts out? All of these guys are supposed to be part of media and news, and yet one of these things don't look like the other. And the one that doesn't look like the other is the one that is getting factual, true information where you can see the documentation yourself, whereas like New York Times, Washington Post, CNN are following the narratives of state every bit as much as if an organization was state-based media. And so it's like, well, yeah, they're not going to be bothered by any of that stuff because they know at the end of the day, they're never going to do anything that reveals something of substance that the public needs, that the government will basically lose its mind over in the way that Assange would. Meaning it should be emblematic of something that pressure is applied to Assange as applied to other media organizations. And why is it applied to one but not the other? I suspect it's because what they are telling you is not necessarily one of those things that is dramatic in the context of the U.S. government and what they want to keep silent to themselves. So, yeah, man, that's a disastrous ruling, to put it mildly. And I don't know if I had an impression of what they were going to do one way or the other. I think it was kind of, for me, it was this open question on whether or not the judiciary in the UK is more fair than the legal or the political apparatus. But according to this, no, that doesn't look like that way at all. I mean, all of these people could be in the same thought process or this kind of bubble of thought and what they think of Assange. I don't know. But this ruling is disastrous. And at no point could the 4 points be upheld. And the moment that he's passed over, Britain loses all control of that situation. That's just if they cared at all.
I fear that you're right on that one. I fear that that's a correct call.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
When we're saying that one. Let's go into a brief break.
Yeah.
And we will be coming back in an open segment. We'll be taking your calls. If you want to join us, 202-521-1320 is the phone number. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines. Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the record.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've been trying to get our guests on, but we have been having this conversation basically about Julian Assange. The news broke this morning that Assange won the appeal, or the U.S. won the appeal to basically extradite Assange. The information is going to go to Priti Patel, who's going to basically make the choice on whether or not to extradite him. I just read it. England's High Court on Friday overturned a British judge's decision to block extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S., dealing a major blow to WikiLeaks founder and his decade-long fight to avoid prosecution by the U.S. government. We're taking your calls at this point. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. You can give us your take on this particular story or another story, but this definitely seems to be the big news for today. There are other things going on, but this is, 7 years, 8 years in the making at this point, with this kind of torture in public by basically the hegemonic power system of the world to put pressure on a particular individual for what he exposed about the way and the workings of that world. Let's see. Do we have any callers? Okay, yeah, we don't have callers yet.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, Tarif in New Orleans. Tarif, what's going on, my man? How you doing this morning? I mean, and this is your issue, Tarif. So I know that you're going to have some feelings about this. What are your thoughts, man?
Feelings is not going to justify how the way I feel right now. But I'm about to get it off my chest. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange today. Free Dungeons and hashtag no more. Let me tell you something. This is what Syrian Girl wrote. At the end of the day, the Assange isn't going to win through legal route because it's a kangaroo court in a banana republic. Other avenues must be explored, and she's damn right. Then this is what I mean. This is what I'm going to explain this. The kryptonite what the West do not like is when other nations control oil, gas, and minerals. That's Africa, the AU. Geopolitics, aligning yourself with Germany, China and Russia. And the third kryptonite to the West is freedom of speech, believe it or not. Julian Assange, Snowden, Daniel Hale, and a whole bunch of people. The movement when they dropped the bomb on them. And a whole bunch of other things, the civil rights movement, Native Americans, poor whites, people get treated like crap in the U.S. and throughout Europe, right? So with the AU, if they won't, look, those security councils is not going to be given to them. They've been laughing at them for the past 30 to 40 years in their face, trying to get South Africa and Nigeria on the permanent security councils.
Oh, yeah, that's not going to happen. They're not going to give that power.
Listen, I understand. They have to start playing hardball with these people, all right? Stop playing on the parameters of the West and start thinking outside the box. Start bringing up Julian Assange's name, because apparently he's a kryptonite to these people. Start bringing up his name. President Ramosi, President from Ethiopia, Balahiri from Nigeria. Start bringing up these men named Julian Assange and Snowden and Daniel Hale, because let me tell you something. The West don't hold back on African presidents. They try to get them out there as quick as possible once they start signing contracts with China or Russia, just like they did with they're messing with the Mali government, because the Mali want to bring in Russian contractors to kick out the terrorists that's in the north. All right? They don't play with y'all. So y'all guys turn around and start helping out those that's fighting for the rights of the people on the planet. Stop playing in the perimeters of the Western media and start thinking outside the box. Go at them just like they go at y'all. You want to play like this with us? So this is what we're going to do with you. We're going to start bringing up Julian Assange names when we go to the UN, because we want them seats. We'll start bringing up Snowden and Daniel Hale and everybody else. You know how many people was assassinated in Africa over the past 40, 50 years, trying to bring an independent government to the countries because they wanted to take the resources and benefit the people? A whole bunch.
Yeah, people have this idea that Africa is a poor nation.
Preach, Tarif.
Yeah,
Preach.
I know, right?
I'm on board with. You're right. Leading the wagon there. I'm on board it, Tarif.
Yeah, man, you're right. I mean, Africa is not necessarily a poor nation. It's economically poor, but from the standpoint of resources, materials, land, etc., human capital, yeah, it's a rich country. It's kept poor. There's a difference in those things. No, Tarif, I agree with you, man. I agree with you. I know you have feelings about this. Every day you make this point about Donziger and Julian Assange. And this is one of those days where basically the opposite of what we've wanted took place.
Normalize talking about this stuff. Normalize the leaders of nations talking about this kind of thing. If it starts with just a couple of nations and the United States competitors, and then all of a sudden more and more neutral nations start talking about things like Julian Assange and Daniel Hale, it might seem like, okay, why those people? But no, those are actually extremely great places to start, or relevant things to bring up. I don't know. And in terms of the long-term competition these countries have with the United States, well, the assassinations that you're talking about, Tarif, how does that come out? Who would be leaking the details on those, of course, in the modern age? It would be Julian Assange. It would be people following in his wake. And so he is a vital resource for nations who are the victims of American aggression and the aggression of other, Five Eyes nations, for instance. They should 100% be standing aside Julian Assange. And it shouldn't just be like Russia occasionally bringing his name up, or, really Russia occasionally in terms of national, press attention that he gets. I'm trying to think of other nations that will occasionally give him coverage. I mean, maybe Australia, because of course he's an Australian citizen. But it shouldn't just be couple countries where his name gets brought up. He is an international person of interest, and it's not just this morning that it makes sense to say this kind of thing about him, given the ruling on extradition over in London. He's just one of those figures that, in the long run, him and people like him if they were free, if there were more people doing the kinds of thing he was doing, clearly all these other nations who have been under the thumb of the U.S. would benefit from it because those kinds of things would be a lot less likely to happen down the line. Anyway, sorry for rambling there a little bit. 202-521-1320. Tarif, you may even still be on. Jamarl, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with both of you on this. I mean, it's disastrous, to put it mildly. And then, this notion of democracy and the requirements of democracy. Well, in order for us to have any notion of the public choosing representatives, you kind of have to know what those representatives are doing. Otherwise, it's somewhat of a black box in regards to their behavior and so forth. How do you know that without the fourth estate? In this case, we're talking about a free, independent media. The guy who represents that free, independent media who could do that story is Assange. I mean, that's basically what WikiLeaks is. I mean, if they wanted to make this argument that, because the longest time the argument was, well, Julian Assange was working with Donald Trump in order to put out information that hurt Hillary Clinton, missing the point that if the information that was put out that hurt Clinton was true and factual, then it was relevant to people putting her in that office. I mean, I guess I'm making the point that any notion of a democracy depends upon a free and open media. And the idea that we were willing to murder Assange, extradite him, or this kind of rendition out of an embassy, for God's sake, gets across the information and how willing they are to torture and go after somebody who's putting out the truth of reality. This is what your world is. And they're like, they hate it. Whether it's the CIA documents that were released, whether it was the spying that was released. I mean, Assange has been instrumental all throughout the course for like a decade or more, putting out stuff that has embarrassed the elite. Because he basically shows this is what they say they are, but here's the reality of what they actually are and the machinations that go into them doing their stuff in that office. That's the reason that he's being prosecuted.
And why does Mike Pompeo want him dead?
That's the other part.
Is it because he makes us look bad? Is that the main thing?
Well, Pompeo, if you remember, he said, I cheat. What he said? I lie, cheat, and stole for a living.
Yeah, but he can say that. Yeah. Does he allow other people to say that kind of thing? Because he can be self-denigrating all he wants to or whatever. He can make jokes.
He doesn't consider that self-denigrating. That's the wild part. Like when we look at it, we're like, oh, that's horrible. But he got applause for saying that. I lied and cheat and stole for America. Like, yes, Mike Pompeo. I mean, but if your job is basically lying and the guy who's telling you the truth is an enemy. He's a clear and present danger from your standpoint.
But here's where I was going for just a second, which is maybe when Assange publishes this stuff, when people do this kind of, Daniel Hill, when whistleblowers come out and do this kind of thing, the response from people inside the agency might be, wow, they're making us look bad. And that might be because they have a higher impression of the agency than they should. And it's just when they get glimpses of it, they're like, wow, they're really misportraying it. But no, it's like, this is just your chance to see how the system that you're working for actually works when you look at different aspects of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, great point.
That idea.
Yeah.
Tarif, I hear you kind of on the line there. We've only got a couple seconds left. Anything else you want to say before we close this hour out?
If Africa won't respect, if the world won't respect, they're going to have to become the torchlight of freedom of speech. You can't depend on one person, Julian Assange, and thank God for that man. He led the way. He showed the example. You don't want to prove the deep state right by just keeping one man holed up in a cell where you got 8 billion individuals on this planet that can stand up and do the right thing. Africa, your journalists, activate them. Start printing out information. I'm pretty sure they're going to have somebody in Europe or U.S. could give y'all some information on U.S. and U.K. Start printing this. Because I'm telling you this, the reason why we're getting close to the wall with Russia and China is because we don't have people like Julian Assange out here.
1,000% agree.
Yeah.
Say this, we got too many cowards out here, man.
Well, we have people who are pushing a narrative as opposed to the reality of events. And, this is one of those things. I'm glad you mentioned that, Tarif, because part and parcel of the thing that helps bring us to the brink of war is also this notion of using propaganda or omission of reality. And so whatever narrative gets put out, the public acquiesces around that narrative and has certain feelings and perspectives based upon what was omitted or, for that matter, what was told. Tarif, thanks, man. I really appreciate the call.
Also, real briefly, Tarif, you're on fire this morning, and I know that you do a YouTube channel sometimes. I just want to give you a little bit of encouragement, man. If you want to get out there, you do research. You do news. Just do your thing. I'm saying just go get out and be on YouTube a little more. I don't know how often you post. Anyway, a little bit weird, but we're closing this hour out. Thank you for the call, Tarif. Thank you, everybody, for listening this morning. We'll be back in a minute with another 2 hours. Be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And over here on the radically independent side of things, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would mean, at the very least, strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Good conversation this morning, even though it's somewhat of a dreary topic. There are days where you lose one, and this is one of those days where we've lost one. But however bad we think it is infinitely worse for Assange and this kind of unpredictable future that he is going to have to encounter when he gets dragged to the U.S. And I don't think anybody believes that Patel and the vassal state of the UK is going to ignore and to undermine the U.S. want for Assange to be extradited. But let's get into the headlines. We're going to have a larger conversation about that later in the show with Misty Winston. She's going to be on at 8:30. We'll probably go with her for 30 minutes talking about it, and we're going to open it up for phone calls for you guys to give your take and your opinion on this. But let's get to the headlines. In the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 123,484 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,294 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 119,788 cases per day, an increase of 30% from the average 2 weeks ago. 60% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 71% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 49,628,788 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 793,227 men, women, and children in America. In national news, well, quasi-national news, I guess, Julian Assange can again be extradited to the United States following a decision day by the London High Court. That decision overturned an earlier ruling by Judge Vanessa Barrister, ruling that Assange would likely find special administrative measures used in American prisons to be oppressive due to the state of his mental health. They were basically saying he's autistic, and because of he's autistic, he was find some kind of way to kill himself. And that was something where she could not allow, or at the very least didn't allow, hence her ruling to disallow the U.S. to extradite. The U.S. gave certain assurances, and based on those assurances, it seems that that's what this ruling is based off. But basically, the new ruling is based on 4 assurances the United States sent to the diplomatic note dated February 5th, 2021. In that note, the United States assures that Assange would not be subjected to special administrative measures, that he wouldn't be held at a maximum security prison before or after trial, and that the U.S. would consent to an application by Assange to serve his time in Australia if convicted in the United States, and finally, that Assange will be given appropriate clinical and psychological treatment while in custody in the United States. The judge, in this case, ordered that it be sent to Westminster Magistrates Court with the direction that the judge, or the district judge there, refer to the UK Home Secretary, who will make the decision. U.S. President Joe Biden gathered over 100 world leaders at a summit on Thursday and made a plea to bolster democracies around the world, calling safeguarding human rights and freedoms in the face of authoritarianism the defining challenge of the current era. In the opening speech for his virtual Summit for Democracy, first of its kind gathering intended to counter democratic backsliding worldwide, Biden said global freedoms were under threat from autocrats seeking to expand power, export influence, and justify repression. And how is it under pressure or under threat? Because apparently they are competent actors. The only people he's mainly talking about is China and Russia. Those are the people who are adversaries. And in this very specific case, Biden is apparently having this democracy summit to put, I guess, draw a circle around that point. We want to get into that, though, because we'll come back to that. Juicy was convicted Thursday of staging a hate crime near 3 years after he claimed 2 Trump-loving bigots beat him up, tied a noose around his neck, and doused him in bleach in a misguided bid to raise his public profile. 12 jurors in Chicago's criminal court found the disgraced actor guilty, 5 of 6 counts of felony disorderly conduct for filing a false police report. following testimony of 13 witnesses and more than 9 hours of deliberation. Following the verdict, Smollett's defense team, or defense attorney, Neye Uche, said the actor plans to fight the conviction on appeal. Like that. That's aggravating to me. It's like you're insulting our intelligence so much so that I would not be shocked if the judge looks at him and says, look, you lied on my stand and you're going to be, there are going to be additional prosecutorial or punitive measures for that. Meaning in a situation where he probably was never going to get jail time, if he gets 30 days in prison, he would have earned it with his own mouth. Delta flight from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles required an emergency landing in Oklahoma City on Thursday night after a passenger allegedly assaulted 2 people, authorities said. Quote, the passenger assaulted a flight attendant, unquote, Oklahoma Police Captain Arthur Gregory told CNN. An air marshal on board Flight 324 also allegedly was assaulted while attempting to subdue the passenger, who was eventually restrained. Wow. Police in Florida arrested a student attending Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for allegedly, quote, plotting to shoot up the campus, unquote, on Thursday, which was the final days before winter break, officials said. John Higgins, 19 years old, threatened to attack similar to the 1999 mass shooting at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, that left 13 dead, according to Chief Jakari Young of Daytona Beach Police Department. Higgins had a backpack that contained a collapsible rifle, a magazine, and several boxes of ammunition when he was taken into custody. Travis Scott told radio and talk show host Charlemagne the God that he's been on an emotional roller coaster since 10 people died and many more were injured at the Astro World Festival. Quote, it really hurts, he said. It hurts the community. It hurts the city. He's talking about Houston, where he's from. It's a lot of feelings and a lot of grieving, unquote. And of course, this is the event that all of those people killed in this kind of stampede. He was on stage, and the question was, what did he know? When did he know it? Why didn't he kind of stop the music or stop the show at the point where the people were injured? But this is his first interview immediately after that event, correct? Shane?
Sorry, I was spaced for a second. What did you ask?
This is his first interview after that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, first public. I think he's made comments through people before, but first time he's actually spoken for himself in public. In an interview like this.
In international news, Olaf Scholz is taking his first trip as Germany's new chancellor, heading to France today to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. Next, he plans to head to Brussels for the EU meetings. Nicaragua has ended its diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, leaving the world with only 14 countries which formally recognize the de facto island state. A road accident in southern Mexico near the border of Guatemala killed at least 50 and injured more than 100 as a truck carrying 100 refugees overturned. Wow. Photos from the crash site show a truck on its side next to a footbridge and bodies laid out in body bags. Wow, that's grim. Jamarl Thomas, who played 10 seasons in the NFL and is considered one of the best wide receivers in Denver Broncos history, was found dead in his home in Roswell, Georgia, according to officials. He was 33 years old. Based on preliminary information, his death stemmed from a medical issue. In business news, a union has won the right to represent U.S. Starbucks workers for the first time. This result marks first successful attempts in the United States at unionizing within a giant coffee chain since Starbucks went public nearly 3 decades ago and could send ripples through the restaurant industry. They need to get pointers to the people trying to do that to Amazon. In holiday news, we have the Dewey Decimal System Day and Human Rights Day. Human Rights Day should be every day. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And of course, Dewey Decimal System is the library system that people are taught when they're kids in order to go into libraries and find books, etc. I don't know how often that's used as much anymore. I mean, maybe, yeah, I would imagine they still use that stuff. I guess we've gotten so digital that, I don't know its prominence. I haven't been in a library in a while, so I don't necessarily know how they go about doing this stuff now. But Dewey Decimal System is what we learned off in order to use libraries.
Yep.
So very interesting that it has its own day. So Juice is convicted. Prosecution was chest thumping when he came out, basically saying, this validates the city. This was a heinous attack on our city, et cetera, and even make the point of saying look, the judge may take it punitively that he's basically lying on his stand about the events that have taken place. And the prosecutor basically impeached his testimony. I mean, it was brutal. Like, hey, how did you know what the people were going to meet? Why were you guys there doing this kind of walkthrough? Why were you giving them a check with the money on it? And even this notion that you guys were close friends, you guys hung out all the time, but apparently they were harboring latent homophobia.
Yeah.
Despite, I mean, this stuff is just really bizarre.
Yeah.
So it's a bit rich that he's now saying we're going to fight this going forward. One last thing, the summit. Why is Joe Biden having a summit? I think that's one of the most interesting things in the world. Now, it's true that he mentioned this notion of a democracy summit when he was running for office, but it's pretty conspicuous that all of a sudden this is coming on the heels of the Ukraine issue. And I think this folds into this notion of why did we have the Ukraine issue in the first place? Is this the president trying to wag the dog without necessarily going to the point of a war or conflict, but doing so just look strong and dominant in regards to foreign policy? So you have this provocation that's created in the Ukraine that didn't necessarily exist, but Biden being resolute and forceful. I told Putin this, and this. And look, I've seen how U.S. media deals with Biden when he's having these kind of conversations. When he was trying to mirror what Putin was saying back at the Geneva summit, they attacked him remorselessly. This time around, he basically came out with all sorts of fire and bravado about what he told and what he demanded, et cetera. Again, this seems like a ploy to make Biden look strong when the reality of the conversation might have been more sane, considering that at the end of that conversation, Biden comes out, or reporting comes out, saying that they're going to try to pressure Ukraine to fulfill the items of the Minsk agreement. This doesn't sound like one party dominating the other party. It sounds like both parties having a conversation with Biden coming with a tweak in his position, because the conversation about pushing Ukraine to deal with the Minsk agreement wasn't there prior. And so, they have the bravado. Then you have the secondary thing where Biden is all of a sudden with all of these world leaders that he's calling, quote unquote, democracies. And he's trying to make this case of America's leadership in the world with me, powerful man, Joe Biden, leading these vassal states, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I think a lot of this has to do with Joe Biden's popularity, that, the polling has hit the bare bones in 30% or something to that point, with 50 or 60% of people being basically against him. Only 25% of the country wants him to even run again. The majority of the country thinking this has gone the wrong way, including 50% of Democrats. And honestly, Kamala Harris not even being a viable option. If you are part of the Democratic Party, you know that there's a slaughter coming for the midterms, and that the president needs to have some level of popularity and some level of status to even be a benefit to you when you're going out trying to win the primaries or trying to win those midterms. Is this kind of reputation washing, this kind of, the washing of his reputation or washing of his political credibility in a way to try to make him look something that he hasn't represented this entire time? I mean, we know they're going behind the scenes to talk to press, to try to make them look better and to get more positive stories. Is this just another part of that? Them putting up something to get him to try to put him in a different light, as opposed to the light that the public has had him in for the last several months?
Yes, but I think it's a bad move for two reasons. One, we're still too far out from the midterms, and two, it's not actually going to work.
Now, why do you think it's not going to work? I agree with you, by the way, but I'm curious.
I think it's not going to work partly because we're too far out for the midterms, and partly because this is a manufactured crisis that's not actually going to lead to something. But I'll put it like this. If this were happening next, July or something like that, I don't know. But in the relevant lead-up period where a lot of the rabble-rousing is going on for the midterm cycle, maybe a bit earlier than that.
Yeah.
But whatever. If this were a crisis that unfolded over the course of several months and served as a constant, stream of news events, every day you're hearing something new about what Biden's done on the Ukraine crisis, right? Yeah. If that were happening mid-next year, then going into the voting booth, that would be in people's recent memory.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it would have resolved by then, but at least it would be heavily weighing on it. It more seems to me, it doesn't seem, I'm going to the impact on the election, which I'm jumping immediately to, okay, importance for the DNC. If you're making the case, he's just trying to shore up his reputation personally.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's like he's trying to shore up his reputation personally to give himself this kind of better light of sorts, where media can give him some positive stories by saying the president is standing looking presidential.
Yes, and it'll be a brief blip of Ukraine crisis or whatever, but then it'll probably fade, and I don't know what comes next. Maybe if this is a way for them to buy themselves time to figure out what their next agenda is going to be and consolidate support behind it, because I'm just trying to think at that level. If this is effectively what they're doing, then maybe that's a success. But I don't see how anything else is a success. Because otherwise, they're just wasting time on this.
Agreed.
You see what I'm saying? If they're doing this right now, and then they're like, okay, we'll figure out, because you got to remember, they don't have an agenda right now.
Right.
For the last month, there hasn't been anything that they're doing. They're just responding.
Yeah.
They're weakening and responding to attacks from the outside, which is how you die.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm speaking overly broad generalizations, but
political death.
Political death. That seems like a pretty predictable political death. Is you get attacked from the outside and do absolutely nothing. So they don't have an agenda. They don't have anything that they're doing right now. This gives them something to do, and while they're doing this, they can figure out what else they should be doing.
Yeah,
and that's how I could potentially see it working. But
I agree with that. I mean,
what are they going to pivot to? I don't know what they.
But that's the rub. I get the feeling that part of this is okay. We need to stop the bleeding, just in general. It's like because oftentimes what happens is you get a set opinion of a particular person, and sometimes at the point where that opinion is set, it is hard to shake people from that opinion of you. And so if you have the situation where it's like, okay, Biden looks weak, Biden looks incompetent, Biden can't get anything done, Biden can't keep his pants up, Biden keeps falling down the elevator. Once you get that opinion in your head, it is very hard to shake and remove that opinion. So it's almost like, okay, we need to stop the bleeding. His polling keeps falling. It's a falling rock. And it's like, okay, why is this polling a falling rock? Because he's getting horrible stories because he's not doing a great job. And then you can go down the list of stories, other problems, inflation, the COVID, the Afghanistan pullout, the inability to seem like he knows what's going on. All of those things become major issues. And so it becomes, okay, we need to stop that. We need to, at the very least, put a floor under Biden's falling. And then we can start whittling our way to try to make him in a better spot.
Yeah.
Because I got to be honest, in this position, he's no help to nobody. He can't, what does it matter if Joe Biden goes into a particular state that's closely contested if he's at 30-something% approval?
But I'll put it like this. Here's another way this situation goes if he's not able to corral the press, because we don't know that the press is going to treat him with kid gloves or whatever. Maybe it starts to turn, like, a continuation of what we saw just a couple months ago in August with withdrawal from Afghanistan, where you saw for the first time the press actually hitting this president.
How dare you extricate us from a war?
What if the press doesn't give him positive coverage? And what if it starts to come out that it was overly conciliatory towards Russia?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's the other thing,
The thing that we were pointing out, that, okay, his message is one of bravado and provocation, but it turns out he was actually trying to reconcile in at least a couple of ways, it seems, with Russia in that meeting. So what if that's the part that comes out? And what if a couple of days from now, my point is there are ways that it could totally backfire.
Absolutely.
Under any of these banners, just depending on how the press chooses to cover it. And I think that's going to be determined by what the press wants. By and here's what I mean. By geopolitically, what the entities steering the press, what they want to ultimately happen. Does the American state, as a sort of net composite, bigger body right now, does the American state want to ease relations with Russia, to try to pivot them against China, which it seems is what Biden is going for? Or does it more want just to keep fighting both Russia and China? You know what I mean? Because depending on which way it leans in a broad sense, I don't know, this is my model, then the media will follow, and that'll determine whether they're kind to Biden on this issue or whether they hit him.
Yeah.
If the American state, in a broad, abstract sense, and this is too abstract, but, I'm kind of dumbing it down for myself a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If the American state, all these factions put together, the results of their decisions, if it works out that, okay, the American state wants war with Russia, then they'll probably not treat Biden's engagement all that kindly and not think too much of the Summit for Democracy or any of that stuff. You know what I mean?
I agree with that. I mean, and I think what's emblematic of that, or I think from a standpoint of evidence, I think the evidence will lean on the side of, okay, what does Biden believe he needs to do in this moment? And what he needed was bravado. I mean, it's like, we need to stand up to Putin. We need to stand up for Ukraine. We need to, all of these things are based around this notion of we're going to be strong in our protection of so forth. And on some level, it's what the media expects. So when Biden comes out and says, I told him and I demanded X, Y, Z, the media is okay with that. Now, when Biden came out before, it was trying to be conciliatory. They were not okay with that. Meaning the media has a certain context of this notion of America's exceptionalism and America being the leader and everything else. And if the president seems like he is not standing up for that kind of banner, because he has to deal with the realities of politics and the realities of governance.
But they'll hit him on it.
They hit him on it.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what I honestly think. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, in the way that they review this stuff.
And I think that's going to determine the PR effect of this event, which is what we've been talking about, as him using this event and this whole unfolding quote unquote crisis or whatever as a PR opportunity.
Yeah. I just don't think Ukraine is enough for that. Like, I don't know if people, who did we have on there? Was like, where's the Ukraine? I think a lot of part is that, where it's like, okay, yeah, we see Biden standing up, but do people care? Like, he keeps having this argument about democracies, as if that's where America's head is. Nobody cares about that, dude. Like, it seems to be his thing. Like, he talks about autarky and authoritarianism and all of this other stuff. And he's been talking about this stuff from day one, as if that's the main thing that is of issue to the American public. It is not by any stretch of the imagination. The American public care about economic concerns. It cares about concerns for a better life and everything else. Not this. This is him in a bubble, and he's missing the point.
I hear you, and I agree. Let's close this segment out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be coming back from our break in just a minute, talking about Travis Scott and, a basically redo of the public perceptions of this concert and what actually went wrong here. Just a brief conversation on this, revisiting like a big American cultural event that led to some deaths and a lot of cultural whiplash, backlash, that kind of thing. Anyway, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a minute, speaking with producer Cordell Woodland about that event. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area or happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So we're going to get into a really conversation about Travis Scott. So Travis Scott told radio and talk show host Charlamagne the God that he's been on an emotional roller coaster since 10 people died and many more were injured at his Astroworld Festival. He says it really hurts. It hurts the community. It hurts the city. It's a lot of feelings, a lot of grieving, unquote. And this came, of course, because during the particular concert, there was basically a stampede that ends up killing 10 and injuring many, many more. The Charlamagne the God conversation was the first one that he had since that particular tragedy took place, hence the gravity of this particular conversation. To have a conversation about it, we're joined with Cordell Woodland. He's our producer at Radio Sputnik on Fault Lines. Cordell, what's going on, my man?
Not much, Jamal. Thanks for having me.
So what did you think about his statement on this? I mean, because for the longest time, we weren't sure whether or not he knew what was going on.
Right.
As the people were being stampeded, he was still basically performing. And that was a lot of criticism being heaped on him. Like, how are you still spitting rhymes when all of these people are being trampled? Like, that looks kind of dicey. But what did he say? What was his main response when those questions were coming up in this interview?
Well, we have the clip of the first one of him being asked about Rock Nation, which is the label that organizes the event.
Yeah.
Telling him to stop the show.
Let's play the clip. Yeah.
Live Nation reportedly agreed to end the concert early after the Houston PD and the fire department declared it a mass casualty event, but the concert continued for another 40 minutes. Was there ever any communication to you on stage that you should end this?
Well, yeah. I mean, they just told me right after, the guests get off stage, we're going to end the show. And that's what we did. Other than that, there was no other communication.
Oh, so you mean after the guests? What you mean?
Yeah, after the guest comes out, okay, we're gonna end the show. But it wasn't communication on why. It was just, that's what came through my ears.
Oh, so they didn't say stop now?
No.
Got you.
No.
Wow.
That's interesting. He said they didn't say stop now.
Right.
What is your take on that?
So I have a couple things. One thing, what I'm going to say is probably a lot of unpopular opinions right now. And I will admit my biasness. I am a big Travis Scott fan. I am. But at the same time, right? So he says that he wasn't told to stop it right away. I think this is why it's important. I'm not saying to take his word for face value, but I think it's important sometimes to wait for all the details to come out, because the initial reports was, they were telling him to stop, and as if he just blew past it and said, I'm not stopping the show. I'm going to keep performing while these people are out here dying.
The people pay for a show, man. I'm going to give them a show.
Yeah. I mean, and according to him, that's not what happened. And there are videos of fans coming up there and telling cameramen on the side of the stage and everybody to kind of stop the show. I'm not going to sit here and crucify them for not stopping the show off of that. There are hundreds of thousands of people out there at these festivals. To just stop the show because a couple of random people have come up on stage telling them to stop the show, of what basis, what merit, who is this to come up here and tell us to just shut down everything that we're doing right now for all these people who are here? So I'm not going to criticize him for not stopping the show for that. Also, the whole notion that he watched people basically die and continue to perform, I think, honestly, it's just ridiculous. I think if we're really being now, number one, I say this as someone who has been to a Travis Scott show and has watched. He has a documentary, Astroworld documentary on Netflix that shows what goes on at his shows, and I've been there and I've seen it. And even on the documentary, you see him stop the show when people are on the ground, because they do have mosh pits. The mosh pits go on the floor. But if he's able to see somebody get stopped or on the ground or something, he stops the show. He's done that in the past, and he talked about that in the interview. But I want people to understand, just put themselves in the perspective of standing on stage when you have thousands of people in the crowd that you're that's there to watch you. It's dark. Certain lights are on, but they're flickering. You're zoned in. You're there to perform. To believe that somebody can sit there and see every single thing that's going on in the crowd, I think is just utterly ridiculous. It truly is ridiculous. You can't see everything, especially when you have to remember your lyrics. You gotta, you gotta entertain. You can't just rap the lyrics. You gotta be on stage. You gotta be a presence. You gotta perform. You're locked in. You can't expect him to be able to know what's going on out there. Now, this is where it falls on, I guess, Travis, where it's about your team. This is, I think, when everybody's blaming Travis Scott, they're blaming just Travis Scott, the person, but Travis Scott is a team of people. And the team, and Travis Scott's team let him down. The security was trash. Complete trash. The communication was complete trash. There's no way that somebody there that's a part of this concert staff didn't know what was going on. Somebody had to find out what's going on in the crowd. Not necessarily him, because he's obviously occupied, but somebody's getting paid to see things that he can't see.
But shouldn't he, we've only got a minute or two left, but shouldn't he take the blame for getting this wrong? I get your point that it's not his fault personally, but it's like he's the one who benefits from all of it. If none of this, if he pulls it off, if they all the security guards, whatever, security manager, that whole team, they get paid. He's the one who's making all the money. He's the one who's leading the show. He might not be aware of it, but shouldn't he take the blame if it goes wrong?
In that aspect, that's I agree with that. He should take the blame because he's the one hiring these people, or he's adding these people to his team. So he's bringing in potentially, bad seeds on his team that aren't doing their job. The security situation was complete garbage.
But you're right. It is weird that he doesn't have any eyes outside of the stage.
Right.
Like, you would think that there would be somebody, whether it's a producer, whether it's somebody like
undoubtedly are security, but it's like, if they see something, like you were saying, there's probably some people who saw some stuff going wrong, but did they maybe report it, or did it go up the chain of command quickly enough to get the word to him within a couple of minutes to cut the thing off, which would have saved lives probably, right?
Totally. I mean, because it makes all the sense in the world for somebody to come on stage and say, hey, Travis, XYZ is taking place. And that didn't seem to happen.
I just don't, just off of past events, I don't believe that he knowingly knew that this was going on and decided to continue the show.
And then another side of this, of course, is, and we're running low on time.
Right.
But another side of this is, these are what people go to these concerts for, right? Is like this like super chaotic, super like high energy levels, you know, like pretty intense.
And make no mistake about it, he's not the only show that has mosh pits or anything about it. Like,
no, of course not.
He's not. But yes, this is, people go to his show to party hard. You're partying hard at a Travis Scott concert. His music endorses it, and he talks about the energy in the building. It is. The energy there is just heavy partying, and it's an unfortunate event that happened, but I think that we need to kind of put things in perspective, and I'm not telling people how to grieve or who to blame or any of that. Travis definitely deserves blame, make no mistake about it, but I just believe that this isn't something that was intentionally done, because I think that's kind of been the mark
Part
put
of it
on
is,
him.
is the idea that, oh, he just saw it happening and he let it roll
let
through.
It go.
Yeah,
I think that's
no,
ridiculous.
that seems wrong. No, there were like screw-ups were made, is your point, but it's not like on the level that a lot of people might be assuming based on the coverage of this stuff.
Right.
That makes sense. Cordell Woodland, thank you for joining us this morning.
No problem.
Producer for the show, of course, Cordell Woodland. We're going to be going into a break and coming back in a minute with Misty Winston, talking about Julian Assange, as this morning the London High Court, making this decision, has decided to undo Judge Vanessa Barretzer's decision from earlier this year. That opens Assange up to extradition to the United States. We'll be talking with Misty Winston about that move, what can be done to stop it possibly, and what comes next for Assange. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back with Misty Winston on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want? News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C., and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And our main story this morning is basically what broke this morning, and it has to do with Assange being cleared to be extradited to the U.S. England's High Court on Friday overturned a British judge's decision to block the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. This is after a 10-year political fight where Assange was basically tortured live before an international stage while he remained in the Ecuadorian embassy, at one point yanked from the embassy and put into Belmarsh prison. Basically what it boils down to is a previous judge, barrister, made the point that Assange had mental or psychological issues, autistic to be specific, and that he would find a way to basically kill himself in prison. The United States challenged this, giving 4 assurances, and it seems that the assurances were in and of themselves enough, despite lack of evidence, that those assurances can be kept to basically overturn the initial ruling. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Misty Winston. Misty Winston is a political activist, organizer, and co-host of both the Facts on the Ground podcast and the hashtag Free Assange visuals. Misty, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning?
I could be better, but thank you for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel you on that. I mean, we have Tarif who calls in all the time saying free Donziger, free Assange, etc. And so he had some serious feelings this morning about this after so many years.
But good ones. Misty, I'll pause on them briefly because you probably find them interesting. Tarif was just saying African nations specifically that are like the recipients of this American aggression should mobilize and start talking about Julian Assange, Daniel Hale. They should start standing with those actors. It was just interesting commentary, and he was really fired up about it. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about, of course. Jamarl, please take us
back. Yes, we do.
Yeah. So I want to get into these assurances for the moment. And maybe let's start at the more basic ruling. What did the judge say? Why did the judge basically allow this to go through and overturn the original ruling by Barrister? And if I'm not mistaken, the ruling that Barrister gave initially wasn't even supposed to be allowed to be challenged, correct?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. So basically what happened today was the judge, so they had the evidentiary hearing. They went through all of the, the prosecution got to put their case forward, the defense got to put their case forward, all of that went through. And then after Judge Vanessa Baratza read her ruling on January 4th earlier this year, and judged against the right to extradition, the United States decided to appeal that. And that's when they decided to come in with these assurances after, the trial had already gone through, the evidentiary hearing had already gone through. So they came in later with these assurances, saying that, they promised that Julian Assange won't be held in special administrative measures, which is essentially, torture, and that he will be treated properly, that he won't be put in ADX Florence pre-trial, which is very funny because that's a very interesting sticking point for me, because ADX Florence isn't a pre-trial facility. It's a post-conviction facility. So the assurances themselves are very vaguely worded. They leave themselves like an opportunity or an out. Like, for example, it says, if he is convicted and sentenced to a term of imprisonment, Mr. Assange will not be held at ADX, save that the United States retains the power to designate Mr. Assange to ADX in the event that, after entry of this assurance, he was to commit any future act that then meant he met the test for such designation. So they're basically saying, if we won't put him in ADX Florence, right away, but if he behaves badly, then we're going to give ourselves that leeway where we can then decide that he's designated for ADX Florence. So there's a lot of vagary in these assurances. They made the claim in court that the assurances that they make in previous trials have always been upheld. That's not the case. Journalist Richard Medhurst just exposed the David Mendoza case. So there's a lot here that's going on, really.
That's so unfortunate. I agree with you on this. What's next for this? Immediately after this? Well, first, before we even get to that part, do you believe that they're going to live up to the assurances? Is there any evidence that the United States is not going to live up to assurances?
I don't think anybody who knows anything about the United States or the justice system in this country would even for 1 second take these assurances seriously. This is not something that. I don't think I think that Jonathan Rees earlier today said that they're not even worth the paper they're printed on. It's a farce. This is all a farce. This entire case from the very beginning for the past 11 years has been a farce. So I don't think that, these assurances would be any different at all. But as far as moving forward and what happens next, obviously the Julian Assange legal defense is going to mount an appeal to the Supreme Court. This will technically go back down to the district courts, Westminster magistrates. It'll be under a different judge this time because conveniently Vanessa Baratza was promoted after she ruled over the Assange case, which is,
she now?
Take that as you will.
What a coincidence.
I know, it's interesting, right? It's very, actually the two judges, there's been two judges who have been affiliated with the Assange case and they have both since been promoted, which is interesting. So yeah, it's going back to the district courts. And then actually it'll probably go to the Home Secretary for final ruling. So we are this ruling today puts us in leaps closer to actual extradition. Kevin Gosztola earlier today on his live coverage said that if you had the doomsday clock for Julian Assange, and let's say it was 15 minutes before midnight, we've now bumped up to 5 minutes before midnight. This was a massive leap towards a real threat of extradition. So they're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. And, it's going to take, again, as I've said on your show many times before, it's going to take mass public pressure to stop this. We have to make it politically untenable for them to continue with this process. I
saw people out protesting in front of the High Court this morning in London while this was taking place. And that's a local protest. Where do you think that... What do we do? Where should that pressure be applied? How do you get it out there? Because I agree with you and I agree with Kevin Gosztola assessment of this. Of course, it's a lot closer. And thankfully, there is a chance to appeal this, and we need to get all the support out we can here and in the UK. What do we do, Mindy? Sorry, Misty. What do we do?
Did you just call me Mindy? Okay, my friend calls me Mindy. No. That just makes me giggle. It's an inside joke. So anyways, what we can do, first of all, shout out to the London crew. I know many of them. They are amazing activists. They're extremely dedicated. They're out there, twice a week, most weeks, Wednesdays and Saturdays. And it doesn't matter, they get hassled by the cops all the time. They don't care. They're out there anyway. So huge shout out to them. They're amazing. But as far as what we can do, the legal system, I don't know that the legal system, other than making it politically untenable for them to continue this, I don't know that we're going to get, a lot of justice out of the justice system. But, things that we can do to encourage that process or to make it politically untenable is we need, if you can organize in your area, your local area, really the biggest thing is just talking to people. There's a massive blackout. I mean, even with this ruling coming today, Assange is trending on Twitter now, but yesterday people were tweeting about it like crazy, and it never trends on Twitter. Mainstream media won't cover it very much. It'll maybe get like a quick blurb or whatever on CNN, maybe not. So really just talking to people, educate yourself about the case, talk to your neighbors and your friends and your hairdresser or whoever you can talk to, because people are really unaware of what's happening and how serious this is and what impact this trial is going to have for all of us. This isn't just about Julian Assange. This will have far-reaching ramifications for the future of press freedom and free speech for every human being on planet Earth. As I've said on your show many times before, the United States is seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism, and that is terrifying. This essentially means that the United States will be able to go and arrest and have extradited to the United States anybody who publishes or tweets or says or writes something that they find embarrassing or that they don't want out there. Julian Assange is not an American citizen, and we're, charging him under our laws and affording him none of the protections of such. Yep. So this is a really scary time that we're in right now. This case is really going to have tremendous ramifications, long lasting. This was something that, if he's allowed to be extradited, the first journalist who will ever be extradited under the Espionage Act, that's going to set a legal precedent that's going to be really difficult to come back from. So we need to make a lot of noise, write emails, send tweets, make phone calls, send letters, talk to your friends and neighbors, organize events in your local area, go in paper, go hang up flyers all around your community, but really just getting the information out there is one of the biggest hurdles that we are facing right now.
What's ironic about this is Obama didn't want to use the Espionage Act to go after Assange because he thought it went too far, and that what it meant for regular media was troubling, kind of basically making your point, to put it mildly. His vice president gets in office and continues this particular process. Secretary Anthony Blinken, and I want to get your comment from this, worldwide, more than 350 journalists are currently in prison for their work, including American journalist Austin Teese, who is detained in Syria. We must be relentless in shining a spotlight on attacks on journalists, demanding accountability and work to return the unjustly detained. Isn't that rich? That's by Anthony Blinken.
Just
Anthony Blinken.
Ago.
Yeah.
Just 2 days ago.
2 days ago. 2 days ago. What are your thoughts on that one?
The level of hypocrisy that it takes for that man to say that paragraph is astounding to me. But it's really no different than what we've seen throughout the course of this 11 years. The United States loves to pretend like we have some moral superiority or some moral high ground to other countries on, issues. If it's the UN International Human Rights Day, Julian Assange's human rights are being violated to every extreme possible. Every World Press Freedom Day, Kamala Harris goes out and makes a statement. Joe Biden goes out and makes a statement. Joe Biden, wrote something about press freedom and how it's essential to democracy. It's a joke. It's a farce. These are the biggest hypocrites on earth. They do not care one lick about press freedom. It's been made very clear. And Joe Biden could stop this right now, today. He could call this off right now. He could drop the charges against Julian Assange and send him home to spend time with his family for Christmas. That is a choice that he is making politically. The only thing that is going to, the only thing that is going to, change that is if we make that politically untenable for him to continue. We need people to get very loud and angry. I'm angry today. I wish other people would get angry about what's happening to this man. He's being tortured to death. We are witnessing an execution in slow motion. This man is being murdered in prison. He is being tortured to death. That's not me saying that. That's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer. He has been subjected to psychological torture for over a decade. And so they are killing this man in slow motion for exposing war crimes. He's done a tremendous service to humanity. He has exposed some of the worst, most brutal war crimes that we've ever seen before. And not just, the collateral murder in the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, but also corporate corruption and other things, and against, countries across the globe, not just the United States. So the service that he has done for humanity, it can never be repaid. And it's time for people to now stand in solidarity with him and fight for his freedom.
It's a big ask, and that's the thing. On the one hand, it's a big ask because for a lot of people, I'll put it like this: a lot of people coming out of the 2016 election, as long ago as it was, if you're a random Democrat what you last remember of Assange, you know, occasionally you might have heard about his being held, but it's the whole thing where Trump said that he was on his side and that Assange had leaked Clinton's emails. The whole Western press has, you know, in the States, pardon me, the American press has made sure that a lot of the people who would have supported your more traditional anti-war Democrats were made pro-war and anti-Assange over the course of just a couple of years. And so for, you know, for the base that you'd hope would be there on a mass basis to get drawn out to support him, a lot of them have been co-opted, and that well has been poisoned. So on the one hand, that is 100% there. But then I think, on the other hand, as soon as people start to learn about this case, they see that he stands for the things that they care about. As soon as people,
and also those people need to realize that he's not in prison right now for anything to do with 2016. You can be mad if you think that that's something that he did. He didn't. And I think once people are exposed to the truth of that, they understand that. But you can still be mad about that and still understand that a journalist being prosecuted under the Espionage Act for exposing war crimes from Iraq and Afghanistan is a very bad thing. And we should all, as Americans, be fighting against that. It is a detrimental threat to our First Amendment.
100%. And other countries, we as Americans should make it our first priority because after all, we're doing it. But this should be, you know, an international thing because frankly, it affects every country. And I'm going back partly just to what Tariq was saying in the last hour when he called in, which is this idea that it's just interesting because I hadn't heard it before, but it started to strike something inside, you know, in me. This idea, okay, these African nations, you know, the no more hashtag that's going around where there are signs that there might be this retrenchment or something that, you know, African nations and other just sort of non-aligned nations that had either been the subjects of coups in the United States or were threatened with them, you know, implicitly, and were doing basically whatever the U.S. wanted it marginally in these different ways. A lot of these countries should start to wise up and start to talk about this kind of thing and, you know, make Assange a thing that they talk about. And when you say, Misty, that Assange, you know, the reason the American state is trying to suppress him is basically he is an active threat that, you know, there are things they're doing right now where if Assange hadn't been held for years, decades practically at this point, that they probably would have come out, we probably would have learned about it. For a lot of these countries that would benefit from resisting American imperialism in the long run, there's like this real existential threat where if you don't get Assange and people like him out operating in the public sphere, Tariq, the caller, brought up, you know, the assassinations of leaders of countries in Africa, constant assassinations, it feels like, for decades. Well, that's a long-lasting threat. I don't see any reason that threat would have gone away. And what's the kind of person who stops that from happening? It's people like Julian Assange. Anyway, 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Misty, part of the key crux of this case and this most recent judgment has to do with these special administrative measures, these SAMs, processes under U.S. law where basically various types of prisoners are prevented from making contact with the outside world, and even like attorney-client communications get monitored so that, you know, if Assange were to be put under these measures, anything that he says to his attorney, his contact with the outside world, would be monitored, and his rights, as I see them, would be dramatically curtailed. Can you please go into what are these special administrative measures that the United States, as I believe, said dishonestly they wouldn't try to impose if they brought Julian Assange over here?
So special administrative measures is something that they can designate people that they claim to be threats to national security or whatever. And essentially you are thrown into a hole and forgotten about. The guards are trained to not have interaction with the prisoners who are under special administrative measures. You have very limited contact with the outside world, and that contact with the outside world is basically under a gag order. They're not allowed to speak about the conditions that you're being housed in, the way that you're being treated, your mental state, your physical health, none of that. So you are it's basically just being put into a hole and left to be forgotten about. Like you said, your legal communications are all monitored. All of your communications are monitored. Every phone call, every visit with your family, every legal contact that you have, all of your email or all of your mail, if you are allowed to get mail, and that's even debatable if you're allowed to get mail. And you're not guaranteed to have time outside of your cell. You're not guaranteed to have time in the outdoors. It is a really horrendous method of treatment that we have in this country that, frankly, I can't believe is legal. That I can't believe that we can treat human beings in this way. One of the ways that they're able to get around this, though, frankly, is that we now have communications management units, which Daniel Hale is now being held under. So the assurances that he won't be held under SAMs really mean nothing because they can just throw him in a CMU, and it's essentially the same thing, just under a different name. So, you know, special administrative measures are, it's a really, really, really depressing subject, but I really highly recommend that people do some research about what that is. That's something that we need to, you know, kind of openly fight against in our prison system. Our prison system is already horrific, even for like a regular general population prisoner. But special administrative measures is, just really, really, really terrible. I can't express enough. It is, torture. In my opinion, it is extreme isolation, and it is something that I don't think any human being should be subjected to.
Yeah, and regardless of what these assurances are, it's not even the judge that makes the determination on what prison he's going into, what kind of prison, meaning whether it's a supermax or whether it's something else. I mean, those are basically things that are done by the Bureau of Prisons or something to that effect.
Yes.
Meaning they can't make these assurances. They don't have any leverage or leeway to make these particular assurances. It's not within their power to make them. And the moment that he's extradited, all potential influence is just going to go up in smoke at that point. Did he get a fair trial? I mean, because one of the questions that came up initially was, okay, the political class is going to be overtly political, and they're not going to work in his interests. They're basically vassal states, so they're going to fall in the interests of the U.S. But the hope was that the judiciary would be somewhat more independent and more likely to be somewhat fair in the way that they go about the case. Was it fair? And if not, why wasn't it?
It was absolutely not fair. I don't think anything about this case has been fair. First of all, they don't have a case to begin with. He did nothing that is outside of the things that everyday journalists at the New York Times or the Washington Post do on a regular basis. But the fact that, we just learned recently that from Declassified UK, Matt Kennard did and Mark Curtis did an amazing article where they just uncovered that one of the Assange judges had a private dinner with multiple members of a CIA-funded group. One of the judges is friends with someone in UK Parliament, I believe, who is on record as calling Julian Assange a worm, a little worm. These are people who are all of the, I don't think anybody would be surprised that all of these, when I say that all of these people are corrupt, they all have connections. They're all, kind of working with under the same infrastructure of empire. And so, of course, Julian Assange isn't going to get a fair trial. I mean, he is a direct threat to everything that they, are fighting or standing for. The fact that he was spied on by UC Global and the Ecuadorian embassy, and the fact that his legal communication, he had meetings with his legal team already spied on, and that information was sent to the CIA. That case is ongoing in Spain right now. You can't have a fair trial if the person who is prosecuting you has access to your conversations with your legal team. That alone should have had this case thrown out and lit on fire. It makes no sense whatsoever. It is a huge violation of his rights. And it right there that you cannot have a fair trial when, the opposition is getting access to your legal defense conversations.
Agreed. And they were spying on him for years.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially at the embassy. That's the Spanish case you were talking about. I'm curious. We have a caller, and I'm going to go to the caller in a moment. But what, from your standpoint, what do you think the repercussions of this verdict or this notion that they can extradite him to the United States? What do you think that means in the long run? And more importantly, of what it means in the long run, why aren't organizations like New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, meaning if Assange's issue is producing news, opinion, well, it's not even opinion, just news and facts of what goes on in the world behind the scenes, that's supposed to be the job of media in general. What's the difference in this context between Assange versus these other mainstream media organizations? Meaning they're going after one, they're not going after the other. What does that mean? But more importantly, or just as important, what do you think the effects of this are going to be if they can basically extradite him to the United States, and for that matter, even if he's convicted, or especially if he's convicted?
To your point about what the difference is, I think, first of all, there's a huge difference between what Julian Assange does and what most actually all other media organizations do. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks doesn't publish conjecture. There's no opinion. It's not, some talking head on a panel, yelling at each other. It is direct source information. They've never gotten it wrong. The entirety of WikiLeaks' existence, they've never had to retract a single document or a single word that they've ever published. So this isn't, an article detailing some journalist's opinion about some situation in Syria. This is source documentation showing you this is the information, this is, the facts, and you can read it and do with it as you will. As far as why, organizations like the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN aren't speaking about this more, and why they don't. I mean, I don't think that they kind of work for empire. Our media, our mainstream media, has been completely corrupted and co-opted. They're owned by corporations. They're in kind of bed with our government. They, WikiLeaks. itself exposed this when you had people like Glenn Thrush sending articles to the Hillary Clinton campaign in advance of publishing, saying literally, I quote, "I know this makes me a hack, but do you want to review this article before I publish it and make any changes?" There was a whole list of journalists who were in bed with the Hillary Clinton campaign, going to dinner parties and having private conversations and all of this stuff. Our media is completely corrupted. And so I don't think that they feel any threat from what's happening, because they know that as long as they toe the line and they do as they're told, there really is no threat to them to be experiencing what Julian Assange is going through. As to why they're not speaking up, I think it also goes along with that. They have kind of made some tepid statements of support, or tepid statements of this shouldn't be allowed to continue. But any journalist who is serious about journalism and who genuinely wants a future for real press freedom, they should be screaming about this from the mountaintops. This is a hugely, I cannot express enough. This will, you said, what are the ramifications going to be? This will destroy journalism. Especially national security journalism. It already has really had a huge chilling effect on journalism as a whole, and on whistleblowing as a whole. I think Shane said earlier, if WikiLeaks was fully operational right now, what would we know? What would have been exposed? And I think about that on a daily basis.
100%. Yeah, the chilling effect is 100% real. What would Julian Assange have been able to get up to in the last decade if he hadn't been so busy having to deal with all these slings and arrows getting thrown at him? And on the one hand, I'm not surprised that there's been this much pressure applied, because he was so damn effective. Like you were saying, Misty, what makes WikiLeaks different is they're objective, and they have to be. If they release incorrect info, if the information that they're given and that they leak and put their imprimatur, they give their approval to, if that information turns out to be false, then their credibility is ruined. They're holding themselves in some sense to a different standard than most other outlets. Who will, if somebody's opinion is wrong or whatever, you expect there to be an error here and there. With WikiLeaks, they're in the separate category where they are only giving you source material, and then it's sort of left to you to rifle through it. And often, of course, what makes the material so interesting is what's in it is they're giving you confidential, scandalous material that you have a desperate, burning need to know about, because you're like, wow, they can do this. I guess I'm going into the psychology of what that's like and the value of it, because they are in another class. They're completely separate. And it's like, why are they going after Assange? Why are they targeting WikiLeaks? Because they don't control it. Because yes. WikiLeaks is one of the few outlets that they don't, there's some outlets that are small enough where it's just like, okay, they haven't brought the hammer down. Or you can shadow ban people. And so some outlets, they have limited traction. They only pick up whatever community they have, whatever. WikiLeaks is in this other class. They were able to work on the highest levels, revealing inside tranches, big, bits of documents leaked from the CIA and the NSA and Stratfor and these other high-profile outlets. They are combining the legitimacy and the credibility of the New York Times, that level of journalism, with genuine dissident, actual pushback, not doing what the establishment wants them to do. And they were singular in that category. And I'm sad to be speaking in the past tense, because obviously with Julian Assange out, it's just been a lot slower. Misty, we're pretty much out of time. We've only got a minute or so left. Any last comments here as we close this segment out?
No, the only thing I really want to say is that if there was whatever reason you were holding back on getting involved in the Julian Assange case, please let that go. This is me begging people to get involved in this. You don't have to make it your top issue, but we need people talking about this as much as humanly possible. We need people to get the information out there. We are under huge media blackout. It doesn't get discussed. And so, we need to get the information out there, the correct information out there. We need to fight against the propaganda campaign that's been leveled at Julian Assange. They've spent 10 years trying to destroy this man's character and dehumanize him so that they can manufacture consent for the treatment that he's receiving right now. So we really just need people to get involved. I'm happy to help anybody who has questions or needs help finding information or resources or whatever. All Assange supporters are generally very open, and everybody's welcome. We don't discriminate against anybody. I don't care what political party you're from. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care. We just need you to get involved.
What's a good website? Right now, what's a good website for people to go to? I mean, even a couple, but
So you can go to Assange Defense has a great website. The Courage Foundation does great work. Action for Assange, we have a website, actionforassange.com. There's actually a huge list of calls to action that you can get involved in, different phone numbers, emails, addresses you can write to, all of that stuff. So those are a few that you can really check out. But there really is just a lot of great people doing great work. Craig Murray's amazing. Caitlin Johnstone's amazing. John Pilger's amazing. There's a lot of great people doing great work and coverage of this case and, the decade that's been leading up to it.
Like you, of course. Misty Winston, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. I appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate you. Misty Winston, for those listening, is a political activist, organizer, and co-host of both the Facts on the Ground podcast and Free Assange Vigils. Follow her on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in a minute with headlines. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour this morning and this week of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, your last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And that means that together, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Good morning again, everybody. We got headlines. I'm going to get into them right now. It's just past 9 a.m. Eastern. It is December 10th, 2021. And despite some of the bad news this morning, I hope you're all having a good one, regardless. Because, hey, it's life, after all. We only have one of them as far as I know. In COVID stats, first up, yesterday in the United States, there were 123,484 new COVID cases reported. There were also 1,294 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 120,000 cases per day. That's an increase of 30% from the average 2 weeks ago. 60% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 71% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 49,628,788 people across the United States. It has killed 793,227 people here. In national news, Julian Assange can again be extradited to the United States following a decision today by the London High Court. That decision overturned an earlier ruling by Judge Vanessa Baraitser, ruling that Assange would likely find, quote, special administrative measures, end quote, used in American prisons to be oppressive due to the state of his mental health. This new ruling is based on 4 assurances the United States sent over in a diplomatic note this past February. In that note, the U.S. assures that Assange would not be subjected to special administrative measures, that he wouldn't be held at a maximum security prison before or after trial, that the U.S. would consent to an application by Assange to serve his time in Australia if convicted in the U.S., and that Assange would be given appropriate clinical and psychological treatment, quote unquote, while in custody in the United States. The judges in this case ordered that it be sent to Westminster Magistrates Court with a direction that the district judge there refer it to the UK Home Secretary, who would make the decision. The defense is appealing this one, however. So we'll see where that goes. U.S. President Joe Biden gathered over 100 world leaders at a summit on Thursday and made a plea to bolster democracies around the world, calling safeguarding rights and freedoms in the face of rising authoritarianism the defining challenge of the current era. In the opening speech for his virtual Summit for Democracy, a first-of-its-kind gathering intended to counter democratic backsliding worldwide, Biden said global freedoms were under threat from autocrats seeking to expand power, export influence, and justify repression. I want to come back to this one, but I'll keep going with headlines, in the Jussie Smollett trial saga story, well, that's pretty much now at an end. I need to see the sentencing, of course, but he was convicted Thursday of staging a hate crime nearly 3 years after he claimed 2 Trump-loving bigots beat him up, tied a noose around his neck, and doused him in bleach in what turns out to have been a misbegotten bid to raise his public profile. 12 jurors in Chicago criminal court found the disgraced actor guilty of 5 of 6 counts of felony disorderly conduct for filing a false police report following testimony from 13 witnesses and more than 9 hours of deliberation. Following the verdict, Smollett's lead defense attorney, Nenya Uche, said the actor plans to fight the conviction on appeal. A Delta flight from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles required an emergency landing in Oklahoma City on Thursday night after a passenger allegedly assaulted 2 people. The passenger assaulted a flight attendant, apparently. An air marshal on board Flight 324 also allegedly was assaulted while attempting to subdue the passenger, who was eventually restrained. Police in Florida arrested a student attending Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for allegedly plotting to shoot up the campus on Thursday. It was the final day before winter break. John Haggins, 19, threatened an attack similar to the 1999 mass shooting at the Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. That left 13 people dead, according to Chief Jakari Young of Daytona Beach Police Department. Haggins had a backpack that contained a collapsible rifle, a magazine, and several boxes of ammunition when he was taken into custody. Good thing they stopped him, of course. Good thing they stopped him. But yeah, man, we say it every time. This stuff happens too often.
Yeah, that could have been disastrous.
Yeah, a lot of people could have died. Travis Scott told radio and talk show host Charlamagne the God that he's been on an emotional roller coaster since 10 people died and many more were injured at his Astroworld Festival. It really hurts, he said, quote, "It hurts the community, it hurts the city." Houston, where he's from and where the annual festival was held, of course, it's the city he's talking about. "It's a lot of feelings, a lot of grieving," he said. We were talking about this last hour with Cordell Woodland. It's feelings, it's grieving, but also you were responsible for it, dude. You should have had better, I don't know, you should have had better stuff, stuff going on there, better security, better protocols. But then Cordell also makes the point, which is people are like acting as if he like knew people were dying and he just decided to callously go through with the concert even though he knew people were dying, which seems that's not an accurate summary of what actually happened there.
Yeah.
But
because we don't, I mean, it seems like he couldn't see what was going on in the audience and everything else. I mean, I think it's a fair point, though, of saying your staff should be better trained.
And you were responsible for it, ultimately. Yeah. I think in terms of, like, he's the one who's, if this never happened and the event goes great and he just does gangbusters on it, he's the one who's benefiting from it the most, I would think.
Yeah.
You know, it's the sense of responsibility. Like, if you're going to, cui bono, if you get the praise or the credit or something for it, then you should take the responsibility too, which is a very simple moral logic, but I don't know. I feel it applies here.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but that, I mean, so should the boss always get blamed regardless of what takes place?
No, but you see what I'm saying. It's a heuristic, and I don't want to get caught up on it because we got a bunch of other headlines.
Okay.
But it's just a moral heuristic. In international news, Olaf Scholz, that's Germany's new chancellor, is taking his first trip as Germany's new chancellor. He's heading to France today to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. Next, he plans to head to Brussels for EU meetings. Nicaragua has ended its diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, leaving the world with only 14 countries to now formally recognize the de facto island state. I'll point out the United States is not on the list of those 14 countries. A road accident in southern Mexico near the border with Guatemala killed at least 50 and injured more than 100 as a truck carrying 100 refugees was overturned. Photos from the crash site show a truck on its side next to a footbridge and bodies laid out in body bags. In sports news, Jamarl Thomas, who played 10 seasons in the NFL and is considered one of the best wide receivers in Denver Broncos history, was found dead at his home in Roswell, Georgia, according to officials. He was 33 years old. Based on preliminary information, his death stemmed from a medical issue. In business news, a union has won the rights to represent U.S. Starbucks workers for the first time. The result marks the first successful attempt in the U.S. at unionizing within the giant coffee chain since Starbucks went public nearly 3 decades ago. That could send ripples through the restaurant industry, and it was unionization at a single Starbucks branch, by the way, of course. Which is just interesting to think about. Like a single Starbucks store managed to unionize. In holiday news, today is International Animal Rights Day, National Lager Day, and Nobel Prize Day. And with that, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, I wanted to go back to the Summit for Democracy thing. I haven't heard this paired with it yet, so I want to do it. Remember that article from not too long ago that came out in the New York Times saying that the U.S. aligned nations were responsible for most of the democratic backsliding on the world stage in the past? I think it was a decade. There was a period they reviewed. Remember that? Mm-hmm. It just came out. And now we're hosting a Summit for Democracy, but we're responsible, and our allies are responsible for most of the democratic backsliding. Now, if you remember from that article, what caused that backsliding? In that article, what they said caused the backsliding among our allies. In other words, allied nations allied to the United States getting less democratic over time, losing rights, like courts getting more politicized, or voters losing the ability to vote. Those are a couple of the examples of democratic backsliding they brought up. Well, our allies are doing it. In the article, what's to blame? Who's to blame for that? What's actually going on here? What they say is the United States is to blame because we're setting a bad example, because we're the linchpin that holds all these nations in their democratic way of being or whatever. We're the example that they're trying to emulate. They're getting more democratic because they see us getting more democratic. The idea is they're getting a really bad example of what democracy actually looks like from us because we're getting less democratic. And so they're all following our example and getting less democratic too. Mm-hmm. Now, look at Biden for a second. It came up in the meeting yesterday, and I hadn't heard it put like this, but I was like, yeah, that's actually pretty true. I can't think of the last president who was more, it seems clearly corrupt than Biden. Yeah. Biden's own damn son is not just selling portraits through the White House in some way, but he was like addicted to crack and influence peddling with other countries overseas and doing that all out in the open. Yeah. Another thing that came to my mind.
Quasi in the open, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
It was Hunter Biden's brother, right? Mm-hmm. No, pardon me. It was Joe. I'm trying to remember which one it was. But the 10% stake of the company that we're talking about with Miranda Devine when we had her on, that she said that there was this company that Hunter Biden made an investment in. Yeah. A 10% stake. He basically bought out. That by 2019, the value of that stake had grown to, I believe the value of the company was $2.5 billion, which would make that 10% stake a $250 million valuation. Well, that stake is owned by like a member of the Biden family, right? It's not Hunter and it's not Joe Biden. It's another member of the Biden family. Immensely wealthy person, right? You got to have hundreds of millions of dollars, $250 million. Who knows how much that would be after paying all the taxes or whatever, but that's a lot of money. Now look at Joe and Hunter for a second. What's their net worth? Single digit millions of dollars. I believe Hunter was about 1 million. If you check Joe Biden's net worth, it's not going to be, it's not hundreds of millions. I'll put it like that. Mm-hmm. Earned $17.3 million over the 4 years he was out of office. His net worth is only an estimated $8 billion right now. So less than 10 million, right? Meanwhile, his family member, $250 million stake in this Chinese company. Why are we not talking about that? That's clear and obvious corruption on the highest level. Yeah. Why is that not like much more of a big deal? Influence peddling in the same way the Clintons, were both known to have done and suspected, accused of doing, but in various cases. Well, that's going on right now. It was literally suppressed. It's just the level of corruption, the level of complete control of the media. And then we think to host a summit for democracy. Dude, the hypocrisy. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, they accused Donald Trump of being the most corrupt president in the history of presidents. And yeah, maybe he was corrupt. But by the same token, at the point where you get into Biden, the argument against Trump was basically that he had all of these relationships with like Putin or some authoritarian leaders. And because of those relationships, they had the ability to influence and leverage that relationship and information on Trump in order to get what they wanted in the political space. All right, fair enough. What about the associations with Biden, with China, with Ukraine, where you have this kind of influence peddling operation where they're using his name as leverage to get certain things accomplished? And, when we were talking about the laptop from hell with Miranda Devine, well, Hunter Biden has lost 3 laptops. And it's not, even though the pictures of him having this kind of heart-to-heart with a working girl, interesting, or him deciding, his dexterity or physical dexterity where he can balance M&Ms on his peanuts. Yeah, that thing.
I couldn't do it. I've tried.
Yeah, I've tried a couple times. I couldn't do it at all. No, so that's a skill. Not just his artwork, but, peanuts balancing M&Ms. So there's that part. Those things are funny, salacious. The crack and everything else, him looking disheveled and out there, those things are salacious. But that's not the part of interest, nor is that the part of relevance. The part of relevance is where Joe Biden says, I didn't know what my kid was doing as he was making like $80,000 a month as a crackhead or whatever.
And as his Secret Service agents go out to cover it up.
That's right. He's like, I didn't know anything about it. However, the laptop that Hunter Biden, for whatever particular reason, kept losing over and over and over again, multiple laptops, get across evidence that that's not true.
You didn't know about what he was doing. You mean like the laptop that you had your Secret Service agents go to pick up, or the gun that you had your Secret Service agents go to recover after your daughter-in-law, your other son's widow, Beau Biden's widow, she went and she threw this guy's gun away. She threw Hunter Biden's. You had your Secret Service agents going. You had no idea that was happening. It's just obvious corruption. He's obviously lying. He's obviously lying, right?
Yeah. And what's in that laptop? I mean, the issue is the evidence that's in that first laptop could be damning. And if this was Trump, they would not shut up about it. I don't believe for a moment that this wouldn't have been investigated if this was Trump, or they wouldn't have been leaning on this or screaming to high heaven about this. Well, in this very particular case, nobody wanted to bring up, hey, Hunter, is that your laptop? Hey, Hunter, is that letter yours? Hey, Jen Psaki, have you read the book, Laptop from Hell? And do you have an opinion on the levels of rank corruption and mendacity that is basically being depicted in that book?
And she doesn't answer it, and
she doesn't want to answer it.
They don't let us talk about it. They make the tech platforms that we have our conversations on restrict us from talking about it. They make it. I'm guessing they made it. There were communications behind the scenes. Either that, or they did it. These tech companies did it voluntarily. But now I'm going to guess they made them restrict this thing. What did Biden?
Something happened.
What
communicate?
Yeah,
you know,
which direction did that flow from?
But they clearly prevented certain stories from coming out. I mean, and not just them. I mean, the Reuters came out. Oh, we don't do BS stories. Come to find out, their story wasn't a BS story at all. And if the media would have asked the question, "Hey, are these articles or are these letters yours?" That's just a yes or no question. That's a very straightforward question. It may be damning if he says yes, and those are legitimate, and that the person who's being invoked is Joe Biden in this kind of influence peddling operation. Yeah, that may be damning, but that's still more of a reason to ask that question, to figure out what's Biden's culpability in all this. And is the president being leveraged by world leaders that know that he's in this kind of influence peddling thing? I mean, that's stuff, yeah, if you're going to make the argument that Trump is being controlled because of, you know, assistance in getting in office, or the PP tape that you're holding over his head. Well, what about the financial agreements or financial arrangements that seem to take place with Biden and his family members using Biden's name for leverage? I mean, come on.
I hear you.
That'd be fair.
I hear you. Let's go into a break, because we're going to be coming back with the guest, Tyler Nixon, who, you know, knows Hunter Biden, grew up knowing the Biden family. We actually weren't thinking of talking to you about that, Tyler, but we might hit it while you're here, especially because we talked to Miranda Devine earlier this week. She has her new book out, Laptop from Hell. That's, you know, you're curious to see if the story breaks, but also partly we want to talk about it because it does relate to what we were planning on talking about with you, Tyler, which is this Summit for Democracy and Biden's attempts to get a sort of PR victory, wring a PR victory out of this new manufactured Ukraine crisis. And I think part of that, of course, part of why his reputation is failing, a small part of it, but maybe not such a small part of it, I don't know, is all this stuff, the Hunter Biden stuff that we were talking about. Even though that story got suppressed, people still know about it. And that's the kind of thing that will damn you as a president. If there's this obvious big scandal that you're very clearly covering up, that you have to cover for by not talking about it and keeping people from talking about it, I think, you know, that's the kind of thing that'll affect you. And I think people still are seeing it. So we want to hit all that with Tyler Nixon when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in just a minute.
Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. As we mentioned, Biden is having this kind of democracy summit that is taking place in the White House, and there's a certain degree of hypocrisy associated with this. Even tone deafness, because I don't necessarily believe for a moment that this is what's on the American public's mind, this ideological fight between authoritarianism versus democracy. And for that matter, whether the United States even has the moral authority or ethical authority, considering the actions we've taken around the globe, undermining democracies and putting in strongmen, whether we even have the standards to be able to make that determination of what is and what's not a democracy. Also, why is Biden holding this? And is this kind of operation to regenerate his image to an American public that in no way, by massive majorities, not want him to run again, considers this particular presidency a failure and not necessarily seeing what it's been getting accomplished? Is this his way of a public relations coup? To have a conversation about this, and including other issues that are going on, we're joined with Tyler Nixon. Tyler Nixon is an Army infantry veteran, counselor at law, constitutionalist, advocate, writer, technologist. He's also Roger Stone's attorney, critical historian, and extremist in defense of liberty. Tyler, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning?
Oh, good. It's it's a beautiful day in America.
It is.
This great democracy of ours.
as evidenced by the president holding
the best
his democracy summit. Yeah. Let me ask you
the
this.
best democracy money can buy, right?
That's right.
Let me ask you this, and before we get into the main story, Julian Assange had basically, the judge approved the extradition. And so it's going to go to Priti Patel, the one in the UK, who's going to make the decision on whether or not to extradite him. However, the judge has cleared the way for it. Considering everything that was taking place in regards to the election and how Assange was folded into this kind of Trump-Russia stuff, what are your thoughts about this ruling? And, we don't have to spend a amount of time on it. It just happened this morning, so I'm just curious on your take.
I mean, the whole thing, Assange is like, it's sad because for those of us who believe in justice, it is like watching a slow motion train wreck, sort of like the Biden administration, actually. And the way they have railroaded Julian Assange, I mean, it is just disgusting. The man sat for years in the embassy in London there and confined, essentially imprisoned. I mean, he had no life really. And then they snatch him out of there in a sort of black bag style raid. He's held in, I don't know, God knows what type of facility in the UK there.
Elmar, and maximum security. And let it go for it, though.
And probably is not being given quite the treatment or aid that he needs, considering his deteriorating medical condition, from what I understand. It's just a patent injustice. I mean, what did the man do? I mean, what can they say that he did other than expose the perfidy, the corruption, the homicidal mania of certain forces and people within the United States government, whether it be past or present? And as a journalist, and I mean, and he never. It's just it really is a comment to me. I mean, I view Assange and how someone views Julian Assange as almost a litmus test for their morality, or whether they have any morality or whether they have any soul. The fact that the man, I mean, he's not, it's like, what is his motive here? I mean, he puts his life at risk. He knew he would be putting his life at risk, considering what he knew and what anybody knows about the ruthlessness of these intelligence agencies and services around the globe, and especially our own CIA. And it's just, you'd have to think he was deranged. I mean, in terms of like, almost suicidal, really, to put himself out there as he did. So it's like, he had no, motive of, greed or anything like that. I mean, he wasn't some player, even some double agent, thing like that, anything like that. I mean, they can portray him as an agent of Russia, but that's laughable. I mean, it really is. So it's just it's unfortunate, and you see it coming to, okay, well, he's able to be extradited to the United States now. Great, so this is just going to drag on. I mean, President Trump should have pardoned Julian Assange. It was one of his biggest mistakes, next to, in my view, not pardoning Abraham Bolden, the Secret Service agent who exposed the Secret Service's, let's say, laxity at minimum in the JFK assassination.
Well, I mean, Republicans should get behind him, right? And I think that's pretty darn unlikely, because Republicans, in my view, are largely co-opted by the whole neocon crowd, which, the whole Mike Pompeo thing, and that's why Trump didn't pardon Assange, I would argue. as the presence of Mike Pompeo and people like him in the administration. But Democrats already turned their back on Assange. I would have associated them with him back in maybe 2014, 2015. But like we were talking about last hour, back in 2016, they associated with Assange with Trump. Trump, in my opinion, should have kind of capitalized on that. He should have gone further in the direction that he went on that stage when he made those controversial remarks. Admittedly controversial. I forget exactly what he said about sicking Assange on Clinton or something like that. You remember what I'm talking about. But Republicans should have, and they should still, there's no reason this isn't an opportunity. They should side with them because the way that Biden is treating him is egregious. It would give them a perfect opportunity to hit Biden. They'd have to deal with some skeletons in their closet, I guess, in terms of, all the stuff that came out during Trump's administration about what Mike Pompeo wanted to do with Julian Assange, which I don't know if you saw this, Tyler, but it was kill him. The CIA was talking about, abducting, kidnapping, killing him. That came out fairly recently in a Yahoo News article. I guess my point, though, is that the Republicans, I really just would like it. I feel the Democrats aren't going to do it. If we were talking with Misty Winston last hour, if there's going to be a turn on this story, I think it's going to come because the public decides to get out there, and the Democrats aren't going to do it here in the States. What other major political organization is going to do it? Well, maybe the Republicans. So my thought is, why not try for it? But we have a lot of other stuff we wanted to talk about with you. But no, Tyler, go for it. What's your
if I may just say, you say Republicans. You're not talking about a monolith at this point. This exposes, excuse the phrase, the fault line in the party between the neocon, militarist, interventionist, globalist and lunatics, frankly, and the more limited traditional American foreign policy types, like led by and probably most noticeably by Senator Rand Paul, who I believe has not necessarily championed Assange, but has certainly had good things to say about him, and has recognized his value as a journalist and the injustices of the situation. And I agree with you 100%. If you were to poll the Republican sort of base or conservatives, I think you would find deep support for Assange, actually. But it's just not. It's one of those deals where the Democrats. I don't think you'll find the same with the Democrats because they view Assange as having basically sabotaged the 2016 coronation of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
So they'll never forgive him that.
Democrats won't ever do
and
that.
I think. Yeah, and unfortunately, with you have these, deep state, basically, sort of figures like Pompeo, who couldn't bash Assange enough as soon as he got into this, became head of the CIA and eventually, Secretary of State, and even Rick Grenell, who seems to be a somewhat reasonable figure within the administration, was part of this bloodlust for Assange for whatever reason. And I just don't, I don't really, it's such a brazen example of our government just covering up crimes and covering up, just the sort of worst sort of things, and then going after the person who exposes it. It's just it's so obvious.
So
I can't believe it. It's scary that they've, exactly. To me, it's disturbing and frightening that they have not only gotten away with it, what they did in the Iraq War and the mass spying and everything that's sort of come to light via WikiLeaks one way or another. But the fact that they can just so openly go after them as though they are enemies of the state, when all they have done is they haven't exposed secrets of that have caused the deaths of agents that are legitimately working for the good guys, so to speak. No, it's always been the bad actors they've exposed, and they're going after them full tilt, and nobody's stopping them. I sincerely agree, or I sincerely hope, and I agree with you, that the Republican Party, or let's just say the non-neocons, the ones who aren't calling for a nuclear war over Ukraine, Roger Wicker. What this people are insane. These blow-dried morons that they send. This is why the Republican Party has the reputation it does. But if you talk to the grassroots, I think you talk to the, you ask a Roger Stone, you ask the people who are more sort of the provocative, I don't want to say thought leaders, but, people who sort of are in touch with the pulse of the party. I think they would gladly see Assange, and not just because he torpedoed Hillary Clinton in any sense, but because he exposed all this corruption in the federal Leviathan.
He's the I don't know, he pierces the swamp. I don't know exactly what tool he would be in clearing a swamp out, mainly because I don't know the tools you use to clear out a swamp. But Assange is the swamp clearer. He's the guy that you bring in to shed a light on any negative situation, because how do you break those, corrupt, if we're talking about deep problems with the CIA or in the, just in the bureaucracy that runs Washington generally? Well, you get whistleblowers out who can identify everything that's going wrong, and you give them safety and a platform. And Julian Assange served as a clearinghouse for information on all the ranges of misdeeds. Now, of course, he was focused on the national security establishment, not bureaucracy generally. I'm making a slightly obscure point, but I guess my point is, that's exactly what would clear out the swamp. Going with Trump's messaging is get more people like Assange operating and giving them more latitude to really disrupt those institutions. Because the CIA, as we've seen, when Mike Pompeo's making those jokes or whatever he's doing about I lied, I cheat, I stole, that stuff that he said, the idea that these institutions have problems, except for a fairly small demographic of like the woke institutional left or whatever, everybody's aware of it. So I guess my point is, I agree on it, but we had other stuff that we wanted to talk about with you, and you've been doing a good job of bringing it up.
Sure. Just one last thing with Assange. I mean, I think it also exposed the fact that, he was doing the work, say that that was done in the Pentagon Papers, similarly. I mean, and I can't believe I forgot the name of the guy who did the Pentagon Papers release.
Daniel Ellsberg.
Daniel Ellsberg, exactly. I mean, it's quite early, you guys. I have to get up early to keep up with you, because I try to watch as much of the show previously. Anyway, so the press, the media, whatever you want to call it, the establishment. I mean, they couldn't praise an Ellsberg enough because he was it was a sort of a black eye on the Nixon administration for different reasons, say the Pentagon Papers. But then, take Julian Assange. I mean, I think this exposes also, if you look at who is absolutely just, goes with the establishment line that Assange is some sort of criminal in the media. And those are the ones who are co-opted by the intelligence and military establishment in this country and, internationally. So, I mean, that's just really where it's at. I mean, I think if you look at any news organization that is critical or bashing and frankly not defending Julian Assange and saying this man is a journalist who released facts that data that the public had a right and deserves and must know. Anyone who is not defending him, frankly, is co-opted and sold out, and it's consistent with the propaganda media that we have today. I mean, this is where you get the truth on Fault Lines Radio, frankly, and similar outlets, but. The mainstream, it's really sad how far down the road they are to being just the ciphers for the establishment.
This is a sieve. This is one of those filters. You can see based on which outlets are covering it and which aren't, where they stand on that, even though some are going to be right, some are going to be left, whatever. That's kind of how I see it, Jamarl.
Yeah, Tyler, I agree everything you just said. Absolutely. I mean, we hit on those topics all the time, this notion of the difference between mainstream media versus something that Assange is doing, where he's revealing the swamp for what it is, as opposed to the people who are basically either justifying it or omitting these kind of vagaries of the swamp. But I wanted to move into the Biden's democracy summit, quote unquote democracy summit. As this is taking place, it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, and tell me, I want to get your take on it, that what Biden is trying to do here is basically, let's say, launder his image. He knows that this last year has been disastrous for him, whereas he started off with this kind of honeymoon period. It didn't all go that well. You have the issue for Afghanistan. You have inflation that's going through the roof. I think it's the highest in like 20, 30 years. You have the situation with COVID still going gangbusters that wasn't necessarily able to be put under control. And it's just been one issue after the next. Even this notion that the inability to get things done, or the campaign promises that were made even after the campaign, and this kind of inability to get your particular party that has the House, the Senate, and the presidency of accomplishing those things, meaning it looks horrendous, even having a $3.5 trillion bill where you're basically cutting down the entire way through. And so the public has given him very poor marks, especially from this notion of whether or not they should elect him again going forward, or whether or not they even want him to seek the election. And the greatest indignity is that if Trump and Biden ran in an election today, at least based on the last week's reporting on this, Biden would lose by 3 points. And so if it's like again, well, no, first time around. First time around. When you said, I was thinking back to when he was running before with Clinton, Obama, and all those guys. But it's still, he would lose, right? And he would lose to somebody who they call the worst thing that has ever happened to democracy. And so it seems to me that they need to launder his image. They need to improve how the public sees him. And whether it's the thing in Ukraine where they basically started a fight, or whether it's this democracy summit, it seems that they're using this as this kind of way of, okay, here's Biden being presidential. Here's him not falling down the steps. Here's him able to keep his pants on. Or for that matter, know the words and things that, they articulate this stuff. This is Biden doing those things. And so it seems like they're trying to stop the bleeding in regards to the image that Biden had basically crafted in the American public of him being incompetent to one of strength and leadership. A, do you believe that? And B, is that going to work on the issue of foreign policy?
I'm just reminded of the Saturday Night Live back when it was like a genuine comedic show. The "Oops, I crap my pants" commercials with, Anyway, so yeah, Joe Biden just is. I mean, he, as I said before, he was never fit to be president, and I never believe the system, are as flawed as it may be, would produce a result that would make him president. It would have to be some sort of something anomalous. And look, I mean, this is the old playbook of sort of just, I mean, they stand up. I mean, Jen Psaki stands up there and just basically is the most impertinent, obnoxious press secretary. Probably, oh my God, I can't even remember one as just like school marm obnoxious, where, it's just, I mean, who is this? Who do these people think they are? I mean, they are half-wits who think they are smarter than everybody. I mean, they really epitomize Biden himself. Biden has always been an opportunistic blowhard who, pumps himself up, has always tried to portray himself as he knows everything about, I was the chairman of foreign policy. I was, chairman of judiciary. I was like, blah, blah, blah. He constantly was inflating himself, but he was a mile wide and an inch deep always. And, when you're under the stresses and the pressures of the global, situation as we have it, the economic pressures and the competition going on with the rising China, and the fact that his son is in bed with them, and I honestly feel like at this point, I don't know what Joe or anybody else could do for Hunter, but there's going to come a point where I feel like he's almost going to become an international outlaw or an international fugitive, because he's involved and has his fingers in so many things, so many dirty deals.
In other words, we might suppress that story in the States, but overseas, they're aware of it, and they might just be like, stay away, don't try to get involved here, that kind of thing.
Yeah, he was such a low-key guy back when we were growing up. I mean, you would have never thought he would turn into this like pedal to the metal, balls to the wall, degenerate sort of criminal.
I didn't see the video with the balls to the wall. I'm sorry, that was one of the worst. I'm sorry.
I mean, honestly, like it's like with anything, he seems to have to do everything in excess. I mean, if it's blow, if it's whatever, he has to be just the most degenerate coke freak, which I witnessed certainly firsthand with him. Back in the days in Wilmington, Delaware, the evenings, late nights, whatever. And then, when it comes to like basically being, I hate to use the term an adulterer, but I mean, how worse can you get than basically bedding down your brother's widow? Yeah. I mean, and it just, and who knows? I mean, if you believe some of the other tapes, I mean, there's, sexually suggestive things involving his nieces and his. It's awful. And then I think on the level of like dealing with getting in bed with these foreign, entanglements, these adversaries of ours, whether it be in Ukraine, well, not necessarily Ukraine, but also even Russia, the mayor of Russia, the wiring of money. And then the Chinese, I mean, they must have seen him coming. I mean, that's what we were talking about.
There was this angle. We were talking with Miranda Devine, who has this, this is the second time I mentioned it in this segment, I think, just because it was a really good interview and a good conversation. And this story was so suppressed last year that to see new stuff coming out about it, I want to give it a little boost because it's such a big story that it feels like there's some karmic reckoning coming on it or something, and I want to be a part of it. But anyway, talking with Miranda Devine earlier this week on Monday, and she made a very similar point that the Chinese welcomed and understood the implication of the gesture, where the younger Biden Hunter Biden, the son, coming with the father. Biden's the one doing the deal making, and her point was that in their culture, you don't bribe the person directly. You bribe the wife or the cousin or the grandson or whatever, just the relative, to obscure exactly what you're doing. Well, so they took that move as exactly what it was. And then what I didn't realize during the conversation that only came to me later was Miranda Devine, during that conversation, she brought up how Hunter Biden had picked up, not for himself directly, and this is a key, who it was for, picked up a 10% stake in a company that by 2019 had grown to $2.5 billion. Now, a 10% stake in a $2.5 billion company is $250 million. That's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
And a big valuation to be held by a member of the family. But when I look at Hunter Biden's net worth, it's $1 million. When I look at Joe Biden's net worth, it's about $8 million. Nobody they don't have that.
Yeah.
So what do they do?
Disclosed.
It's another member of the family, or it's stuff that gets undisclosed. The level of corruption, and that is rank political corruption by the leaders, the family of the United States. I don't know how else to say it. For all the claims, the emoluments claims with Trump and his family that he should try to push away the business dealings and all that. What is this? Yeah. And we're doing a Summit for Democracy and saying that everybody should imitate our example. Biden's example. What example? I don't know, Tyler. I'm just kind of.
Well, no, it's just no. You've put your finger on. I mean, the emoluments clause and Trump, having people stay in his hotel amounts to the influence on his versus Joe Biden's son doing business directly with the top leadership of communist China and selling us out essentially and making billions potentially. And for what? I mean, the subtleties or the nuances of American foreign policy that could be basically to our detriment and to the communist Chinese benefit that cannot be necessarily directly traced or detected as like a quid pro quo are almost innumerable. I mean, just the fact. I mean, it's really messed up that we have this sort of grifter family from Delaware, my home state, sadly, who can achieve this level of power or position and officialdom in our country, and they're just, I mean, they're literally are grifters. I mean, it's just like grab whatever they can lay their hands on. I mean, Jimmy and Frank Biden. I mean, these people running around just like literally, the selling influence. Like they were selling, like their old man Biden was selling used cars, frankly. And I mean, seriously, it boggles the mind. And the thing is, they are that low life. They are that cheap. They're not sophisticated people.
No,
that's why you see Hunter being
the Clinton Foundation. They were doing the exact same thing. This seems to be more the Democrats' problem than the Republicans, but whatever. This is now enough of a through line that we can say that the Democrats have a firmly entrenched problem with the families, their official parties, using influence peddling overseas, amassing, I'm guessing, quite a large personal wealth. It's the second time it's happened in the last decade or two. And again, I just want to point out, we're hosting the Summit for Democracy. Ain't it great, folks? Another thing I pointed out, I think either earlier this hour or last one, is a recent New York Times article. I'll just give the actual headline so people can find it. I didn't before. U.S. allies drive much of world's democratic decline, data shows. That's the title of an article from the New York Times out mid-November, November 16th. A little bit less than a month ago, of course. In that article, they highlight how all these other nations aligned with the United States have seen more of a decline in democracies than the nations that we often blame for, autocracy and their backsliding. We blame Russia and sometimes China, these other nations. But if you look at it, this article shows, and again, New York Times, not a fringe outlet. No, it's actually our allies that are responsible for a lot of this stuff. And in that article, what they say is the United States is to blame for that backsliding because these other countries are following our example. For decades, here's my point. We've had leaders of this country doing personal dealings, and this is just one component, one facet of American corruption. For decades, out in the open, it's happening right now. And yet Biden, not seeing what's in the mirror or whatever, or just completely ignoring it, decides that this is the thing he should do to bolster his reputation. In fact, the plank of his foreign policy is how, of course, we're a democracy and all these other autocracies that are on the rise.
Oh, yeah, it's unreal. I mean, listen, I mean, if the Democrats and especially Biden's, I mean, if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. I mean, the worst sort of hypocrisy.
I heard that's the Roger Stone line. That's a Stone line. I remember that one because I've copied that, Tyler. That's
really?
Yeah, I know that one.
I never heard that from Roger, actually.
Oh, really?
Maybe he did say that at some point.
I've heard that one.
I mean, I heard it from years and years ago
Maybe
but
he copied it from you.
it was kind of like if it was kind of like similar to the if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all.
Exactly.
But anyway, that's more the Irish side of things. But anyway, that and basically the worst form of hypocrisy is sanctimonious hypocrisy. And let's face it, I mean, this Biden clan, in addition to just being pathological liars and psychopaths at this point, the sanctimony in their hypocrisy is stunning, to the point it's like you people are living in delusion world, and that's why they will continue to tank and will continue to sink into oblivion, to where I saw some recent polling data that had them at 22% of, in terms of wanting Biden to see Biden, return to the White House in 2024, with 12% for Kamala Harris. And within the Democratic Party, only 28% or something like that. I mean, it's just like when you've lost your own base.
Yeah.
And it's because Biden represents, I mean, he epitomizes just everything that's terrible about not just the Democratic Party, but also the entire Washington, D.C. incumbency, perpetual incumbency, sort of the immunity from any type of accountability as you run around being this pompous blowhard, supporting the most detrimental and disastrous policies, whether it be the drug war or the wars over in the Middle East and overseas. And now, I mean, just, and Biden is so insulated from it. I've always said that, this is pre-dementia, because I don't really think Biden's there much anymore. So it's like, unfortunately, you've taken a really flawed figure through his career when he was compos mentis, I guess, and you've attached to him some of the sort of the worst sorts of despicable schemers within the American political establishment, and you have this media that's sold into having to prop this guy up for whatever reason.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's just a nexus, a total nexus of failure and disaster in the offing that is probably going to ensure a Republican, or certainly anything but a Democrat majority, for potentially a generation or more.
I don't know about a generation, but definitely going forward. I mean, put a fine point on it. Blinken, I was reading this quote today. Worldwide, more than 350 journalists are currently imprisoned for their work, including American journalist Austin Teese, who's detained in Syria. We must be relentless in shining a spotlight on attacks on journalists, demand accountability, and work to return the unjustly detained. This was 2 days ago. And today, the Julian Assange verdict is coming in. And to make it that much more, I'll put a finer point on it, part and parcel to Biden getting in was this notion that I'm the adult in the room, or we're the adults in the room, America is going to get engaged to the rest of the community again, et cetera. And Trump is corrupt. That's their main point. All right, so New York Post, and this goes to your home point about the press, how if the roles were reversed, all of the stuff that was in that laptop would have been aired into the main public, and they would have been talking about it with all sorts of condemnation immediately. For Trump, look at what they did. They did an investigation into Trump for basically 4 years based on a conspiracy theory, only get to the point where the people who were pushing this stuff to the FBI were basically caught lying to the FBI. And so for 4 years, they basically went with an investigation trying to depose the sitting president using a conspiracy theory basically as a psyop to do so.
And still double.
They're still doing
pushing it.
But when they do go to Biden, what do? They hide that stuff. And even though they're hiding it, and even though the press is giving Biden this kind of free pass for all intents and purposes, they're still complaining. So Biden working behind the scenes in order to get the press to give him better coverage. Well, this is New York Post. This is one of the letters that I was talking about prior. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and giving me the opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and a pleasure. As we spoke yesterday evening, would be great to meet today for a quick coffee. What do you think? I could come to your office somewhere around noon or so, before that to the airport. Now, the key point to that is, dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and giving me the opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. Now, the person who he's given this to is Vadim Pozarski. He's an advisor to the board of Burisma. Now, keep in mind, Biden had up to this point, Burisma, thank you. Biden had up to this point basically said, I had no communications with what my son was doing. I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't know anything about it. According to this letter on his laptop, that's not true. And that's just one. And so it's like, what would
confirmed,
Julian have
confirmed
done?
by Tony Bobulinski, confirmed by other people too.
That's the other way.
Outside confirmation. You can dismiss the laptops. I don't know how you dismiss them as, oh, that's Russian interference or whatever.
Email.
Whatever they were using last year. Because of course it was exactly that.
Russian disinformation.
Russian disinformation. I guess they'd be accusing them of planting the laptops, and that was curious.
Just ask the question.
That was curious at the time.
Is this laptop yours? Is this email yours?
They didn't deny that the laptop was his.
That's right.
And then you had other people like Tony Bobulinski coming forward and saying, yes, this laptop. Well, confirming what the contents of the laptop.
Hunt's interview when he discussed it when he said something like, "Oh, I don't know whose laptop it is," or "I don't know what happened to my laptop." I mean, it was so disingenuous. I mean, he was clearly coached to give that sort of non-answer answer. But I mean, this is what you get, unfortunately, with that's why I always really shuddered at the thought, or perished the thought of Joe Biden ever ascending beyond where he was. And when he became vice president, I was like, oh my God. And then I'll tell you what, when I had my radio show in Delaware back in 2014, I remember covering and discussing at length Hunt's appointment to the Burisma board, thinking, well, I guess Hunt's a pipeline expert now, huh? Yep. And, just basically went into the same thing. I said, this isn't going to lead to good things. And, the fact that I imagined, I didn't conceive of how much money he was going to be paid, but I knew there was some sort of influence peddling or some sort of, profiteering going on there. And, the Bidens have never, Joe Biden was elected at 29 years old. He was a brash, big mouth, blowhard, self-promoting, just sort of a half-wit who thinks he's the smartest and greatest guy there ever was. And, but deep down, I think he knew of his, what he was really about. I think Joe Biden, and I summed this up as saying that Joe Biden has spent his life, and this is, again, the pre-demented Biden, he spent his life trying to disprove what he knows other people believe about him. So in other words, it's always this preemptive, like, I've got to prove that I'm not the idiot everybody thinks I am. The problem is he is the idiot everybody thinks he is or was. And he is the blowhard and the sort of, the guy who's going to march to the front of the parade, who's going to, be a total opportunistic operator who has, like, really just, a sort of empty suit of the worst sort with the biggest mouth you can imagine. I mean, almost soulless, really.
Wait, there was one part of that. Did Hunter say this about his dad? Is this something, I might have misunderstood what you said, but it sounded almost like you were saying this is a sentiment that you'd heard Hunter express about his father.
No.
Okay,
no, I've never heard. But I've said before that I think Hunt resents his dad, and resents I did say that, Hunter at one point just sort of said to me, kind of offhandedly, one-on-one it was a small gathering, but whatever, we were just sort of chatting off to the side, and he was just like, I don't want to be. He never wanted to be in the spotlight. He never wanted to have his life under scrutiny. And he didn't want to be someone who couldn't just be anonymous, and, well, for obvious reasons with the drug use and the profligacy and whatever. But just generally speaking, I don't think he was the type of person who wanted to be in the limelight, in the spotlight. And I think he resented his father for it. And particularly after Bo's death, I think it was like, well, there goes the golden boy. It's all over. There was no passing the baton to Hunter. That's for damn sure. Yeah. So he just became sort of the money mule for the family, who had to do all the monetary dirty work. And I think, Hunter, sort of being degenerate enough to would just, I guess sort of almost nihilistic about it, just sort of gave up and just, said, screw it. I might as well just live it up, get the max out of it, whatever I can get out of the situation. And just, go pedal to the metal, as I said. But I think he deep down does resent his father, because, who would be, he used to be paranoid as hell. He would change his phone number once a month. He would I once called him, and it was like, or call a number, and he literally through another friend said, that guy called me, and it was like this thing, like he didn't want to take a call from me, like a Republican named Nixon. Oh my God. Or on any, subject. And he was so paranoid. And it's like, well, how would somebody this paranoid and, clearly wasn't a fool about technology, just leave troves of incriminating and if not otherwise scandal-producing information?
Yeah, I guess because he's out of it, right?
Such
and kind
loosely.
of
I'm sorry. I know he was, sort of out of it and probably, you know, in drug-addled states. But I mean, please, I mean, come on. He was never that far gone that he would leave that. I almost feel it was like subconscious or almost Freudian. Yes, like he was like, yeah, fine, you know, I'll do this for you, Dad. I'll be the money pimp for the family or the money whatever. But oh, whoops, oh, my laptop, how'd that get there? You know what I'm saying? It's like this weird sort of
how do you lose
Freudian sort of.
I mean, he lost 3 of them.
Yeah. Well, how do you leave a laptop with a company that's calling you saying, "Hey, I have your laptop"?
Yeah.
You know, and just abandon it. I mean, like it really begs the question of, is this purposeful? I mean, like I think really.
So are we?
You know,
wait, Tyler. Then another. Where does this go? Are we going to see at some point potentially Hunter come out? Hunter undo Tyler. I mean, pardon me. Hunter undo Joe. Are we going to see him decide to get on top of this story, get out of this story? I think we're just going to go through the end of the show.
It would never be consciously. It would just be like he just continues to be so brazen and reckless in these dealings. Or if he's put a sort of lid on them now that he's, you know, a what is it, a blow artist, I guess you could call it, with the weird paintings he does when he blows through a straw. I'm like, boy, that's not the usual direction for straws that you know, are in Hunter Biden's orifices anyway. You know, that are mysteriously being bought up by anonymous buyers for $500,000 each. I mean, give me a break.
Now that he has that cash cow, now that he has an incentive to stay in the game or something.
Sure.
But you know, but I guess
he's all in. I mean, but I think he almost is like at the point. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what his psyche is, but I think he's just going to like be as reckless as he can be until it all comes crashing down, which I have a feeling it probably will, because Joe is getting to the point of not being there enough to even grasp what's going on, enough to protect him. And if they decide to jettison Joe, that he's, you know, he's too deranged, or he's a total liability as he is now for the party. Yeah. I mean, Hunter can't think he's going to be protected.
Let me real quick, and I'm going to pass it back to Shane. Just news this morning. Stephen Donziger, Danbury, he just put this up. Breaking. Danbury prison officials released me this morning to serve the rest of my sentence, 136 days at home.
Awesome.
Huge step forward for the campaign, but the battle for my freedom and hold Chevron accountable continues. So grateful.
That's good.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been following this, Tyler, but Stephen Donziger, Chevron, attorney fighting Chevron over this case of pollution in Ecuador. Yeah, and he there's all sorts of weird stuff with his house, you know, being trapped in the house for like multiple years. Anyway, that's good to hear.
If that isn't like proto-fascism, I mean, come to life, where you have a private, you know, massive company that's basically dictating the terms of to the point of imprisoning opposing counsel,
dealing with the stuff overseas. Yeah, and they had dealing with the stuff in a nation that can't battle Chevron, and so you have an American attorney who goes in there trying to help out. And then he wins. He actually managed to get a victory. He's fighting Chevron, and then to punish him, and I'm guessing to cover their tracks, sort of to like pivot. Oh no, we didn't lose. We got, you know, this corrupt attorney beat us, and the reason that he beat us, the implication is because he's corrupt. They decide to pivot, or they decide to back home in the States in a corrupt court in the Southern District of New York, pursue this guy, hounding him in unprecedented ways, where, you know, getting information about his contact with his client. He's a lawyer. You have to expect attorney-client privilege. No, that stuff comes out. They get that. The judge reviewing the case, instead of reviewing the case in this New York City courtroom, she's just sitting there reading the newspaper. She's already made up her mind. And it was, you know, event after event.
It's another instance of just a really sad statement and commentary on the state of the judiciary right now, that, you know, the notion that we can have justice in these courts if the odds are stacked against you, if their forces and the powers that be don't want you to have justice, you're not getting it.
Yeah.
And that's really, really messed up, because I mean, that's our last redoubt. And, you know, lawfare is real. And this is another example of it, how it's not just necessarily in the political world, and it's disgraceful. I mean, look at the ascension, of this Rollins as U.S. attorney, this unhinged person in Massachusetts. I mean, I'm sorry, but like this is not a stable person, you know, of like goodwill and, you know, who is looking to do justice. I mean, she is a megalomaniac, clearly, and totally unhinged lunatic, as far as I'm concerned.
I haven't been following
and a racialist as well.
I'll look into this. You're talking about the new, Rachel Rollins, U.S. attorney from Massachusetts, Suffolk County District Attorney.
Yeah, she went berserk because she was basically But I'll let you look into it because
I will look into it. No, yeah, that's interesting. Real quick, we're basically out of time, but what I wanted to hit, and literally just for a couple of seconds. Hopefully, we can get Roger himself on soon. But Roger Stone, I saw the article that you sent over, the Roger Stone statement. This is, of course, in response to the January 6th committee investigating this stuff, and there's been developments on there having to do with Mark Meadows and more. Just real briefly, any quick comment you want to make in about 20 seconds before we close, Tyler?
Witch Hunt 3.0, whatever people want to say, Trump was trying to, stage this. Well, I mean, what do you do when you see the election being basically, stolen from you by fraud? And look, I mean, I'm sorry. The Arizona Maricopa County audit revealed, for example, almost 35,000 duplicate ballots. I mean, these are facts, and they've been papered over by the mainstream media's desire to just, reinforce the fact that it's because it's Trump, we can screw him, and nobody's going to get any justice on it.
We got to get into that some other time because Jamarl's sitting here shaking his head. But with the Witch Hunt 3.0 thing, I agree with you ultimately. Tyler Nixon joining us. We got to close today's show out. Thank you everybody for joining us. See you again on Monday. Have a great weekend, folks. See you on the other side.